Good afternoon. The committee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. We have a lot of business to catch up on, given that the Schumer shutdown has concluded. Today, the Rules Committee is convening to consider 8 separate measures: SJ Res 80, HJ Res 130, HJ Res 131. I'm sorry, I'm going to go back. SJ Res, I'm not sure how I read that first one. HR 1949, HR 3109, HR 5214, HR 5107, and H. Conres 58. The 3 Congressional Review Act resolutions before us today, alongside HR 1949 and HR 3109, are part of our efforts to unleash and utilize the abundance of natural resources that our nation has to offer. And who will stand to benefit when we pass these pieces of legislation? The American people. That's who. Our colleagues have shown us repeatedly they oppose the development of energy that comes from American soil. They have such an allergic reaction to it, it's quite a perplexing position to have. We have vast repositories of natural resources across our entire nation. Why in the world would we deny ourselves the opportunity to harness them and utilize them accordingly? I'm sure Chairman Westerman will do an excellent job of cutting through the noise and explaining to everyone why these pieces of legislation are important and what they mean for the nation. Next, we turn to H.R. 5214 and H.R. 5107. H.R. 5214, the District of Columbia Cash Bail Reform Act of 2025, would require pre-trial and post-conviction detention for crimes of violence and dangerous crimes and require mandatory cash bail for certain offenses that pose a threat to public safety or order in the District of Columbia. Crime and lawlessness should not be allowed to run rampant in the streets of Washington, D.C. Our capital city should set an example that the rest of the country should follow and not be burdened by violence and criminality. Thanks to the efforts of President Trump, the streets here are safer for the first time in many years. We can add to this progress by revoking cashless bail so that balance can be restored to the criminal justice system in D.C. too. H.R. 5107, the Clean D.C. Act of 2025, would repeal the Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Amendment Act of 2022, enacted by the District of Columbia Council. The enactment of the Comprehensive Policing and Justice Reform Amendment Act in January of 2023 effectively bound the hands of local law enforcement in D.C. It contains many progressive measures that target law enforcement officers' actions, particularly in emergent situations. It also makes it easier to fire officers for actions that anti-police activists do not approve of and embolden these same activists to target law enforcement officers for acting within the parameters of their public safety role. Even the D.C. Police Union has voiced its concern over this act and has lost over 1,600 officers because of it. It's evident that this misguided act must be repealed entirely. The last item on today's docket is H. Conres 58, a resolution denouncing the horrors of socialism. Socialist ideology necessitates a concentration of power that has, time and time again, collapsed into communist regimes, totalitarian rule, and brutal dictatorships. We can and should denounce this corrosive ideology in the strongest possible terms. This resolution before us will allow for that. With that, I now yield to Ranking Member McGovern for any comments that he wishes to make.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate that the committee has gotten back to legislative business this week. But after taking a look at this week's bills, I'm not positive how good that is for the country. 8 weeks of paid vacation, and this is what Republicans came up with. Nothing at all to lower prices or address people's everyday concerns. No, none of that. Instead, we will get reruns of bills that you've already passed. I mean, give me a break. The Unlocking Our Domestic LNG Potential Act was supposedly so important that Republicans passed it last Congress multiple times, and then didn't even bother sending the bill to the Senate. I mean, you guys pretend like what you're doing is a big deal, like it's going to make a difference for people the second it's passed, and you never even send it to the Senate. Has anyone on the other side ever watched Schoolhouse Rock? I mean, I think you ought to, because you guys might learn a thing or two. By the way, for the record, not a single appropriations bill is being considered this week. Not one. We've had 8 weeks out, 8 weeks, 8 full weeks out, and where are all the appropriation bills that we've been promised? We're barreling towards another shutdown deadline. Why aren't Republicans bringing up one appropriation bill after another to get this done so you don't have to do another continuing resolution? And I'm noticing on the agenda here today a number of bills dealing with the District of Columbia. Let me give my colleagues on the Republican side some advice. If you really want to micromanage D.C.'s affairs, then resign from Congress and run for city council here in D.C. Then you could have more of a say in what's going on here in the District of Columbia. I mean, but to micromanage every bit of D.C.'s affairs is offensive. I mean, the President of the United States, you know, wants to have control over what the name of the football team's going to be. I mean, this is ridiculous. The people of D.C. pay taxes, just like the people in our districts. People here have served in our military. People here have sacrificed their lives fighting for this country's freedoms, and yet they don't even have a full vote here in the United States Congress. So, I mean, it's just so offensive. And meanwhile, as we're talking about all this stuff, everything is getting more expensive. Groceries, rent, gas, childcare, energy costs, health care. And now, after 11 months of Republican leadership, we finally get their plan to address the economic uncertainty that so many families feel. And what is their plan? What's the big reveal? It's to tell people that there is no affordability crisis. Inflation isn't real. Costs aren't up. I mean, you got to be kidding me. Can I just offer some advice? Let me critique the last administration. I don't think President Biden spent nearly enough time talking about and addressing the affordability crisis. Many of my colleagues in Congress raised the alarm to no avail. And you know what? You guys are making the same mistake. Donald Trump promised to bring prices down, to make life more affordable. He didn't say he would tweak inflation or nibble around the edges. He said he would work to bring costs way down. Well, I go grocery shopping in Worcester, and I look at my receipts. Prices aren't going down. They're up, and going up even more. Trump is bragging about that Walmart's Thanksgiving dinner package got cheaper, $15 cheaper. And then I look at the fine print. It's because they removed items. They shrank the dinner package, and surprise, the price goes down. Maybe if Trump or anyone in his billionaire-first inner circle actually went grocery shopping like the rest of us, they'd know that. But they don't. They don't live how the rest of America lives. And it's not just Trump's failure to bring costs down, it's that he's making it worse. He said his tariffs would not raise prices, and they did. He said they wouldn't be paid by Americans. They are. And now every single one of us is paying more for everything due to his stupid trade war. So please excuse the American people if we don't applaud him for swooping in, reversing some of the stupid tariffs, and trying to take credit for fixing a problem that he himself created. And finally, on the Epstein files, after months of Republicans blocking transparency, stonewalling in this committee, inventing excuses and trying to block these files from ever coming out, a majority of members of this body have now signed a discharge petition to force a vote. And out of nowhere, miraculously, your leadership is now eager to bring the bill to the floor. We welcome your sudden change of heart. But we know what this is about. Trump gave you all permission. Last week, he was calling people into the Situation Room to try to kill the release of the files. But he knows he failed, and so now, finally, we get a last-minute attempt to try to save face. Guess what? I'll believe it when I see it. I'll believe it when the Senate votes on the release of the files. I'll believe it when he signs the bill into law. And frankly, I'm concerned that even if he does, he's going to try to invent a new excuse to bury, cover up, and block these files from coming out. For months and months, this Republican majority voted time after time after time to cover up for a pedophile. I think it's disgusting. And for the sake of the survivors who deserve accountability and for the public that deserves transparency, these files must come out. I yield back my time.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Without objection, any prepared statements that our witnesses may have will be included in the record. I now welcome our first panel, Representative Latta and Ranking Member Pallone from the Committee on Energy and Commerce. Your full statement will be submitted for the record, and we ask that you summarize your statement in 5 minutes. Representative Latta, I welcome your testimony.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Ranking Member, members of the Rules Committee. Thanks for the opportunity to testify before you today. I'm pleased to speak in support of two pieces of legislation, H.R. 1949, Unlocking Our Domestic LNG Potential Act, and H.R. 3109, the Researching Efficient Federal Improvements for Necessary Energy Refining Act. Both bills are aimed at unleashing our nation's natural resources to bolster national security, lower domestic prices for consumers, and supply our allies with critical fuels. Geopolitical events over the last several years have reaffirmed the world's need for American energy. Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine in 2022 led to a reshaping of global energy markets as a significant amount of oil, natural gas, and refined products were immediately sanctioned. In response, American energy producers stepped up to the plate, supplying Europe and other allies around the world with critical energy. In fact, the United States was the largest supplier of liquefied natural gas to Europe in 2023. Not only has U.S. LNG helped stabilize global markets, but has also decreased costs for domestic consumers and supported thousands of American jobs. In fact, in just a few years, the U.S. has increased its LNG export capacity from 0 to 11.6 billion cubic feet per day. During the same period, the spot price of U.S. natural gas has remained stable and affordable. Unfortunately, these cargoes were threatened in January 2024 when the Biden-Harris administration succumbing to political pressure and announced an indefinite ban on LNG export authorizations. During the ban, Russia overtook the U.S. as the lead gas supplier to Europe. Long-term American contracts were jeopardized, and American and global buyers were forced to look elsewhere for less clean sources. H.R. 1949, led by the gentleman from Texas, would ensure a ban is never placed on U.S. LNG exports again. By removing DOE from the process, export restrictions would be repealed, and LNG exports would have equal treatment with other commodities like crude oil. Nothing in this legislation limits the authority of the President to impose sanctions on a foreign government to prohibit imports or exports if needed. Additionally, this legislation does not affect existing FERC authorities or procedures for reviewing or altering the export facility for environment or safety purposes. Excuse me. Like LNG export facilities, American refineries have played a critical and crucial role in providing secure, affordable, and high-value petroleum products to global consumers. However, a new major refinery has not been built in the United States since the 1970s. Meanwhile, the U.S. Energy Information Agency Administration, EIA, projects global demand for liquefied fuels to increase by 20 million barrels per day by 2050. The United States must be able to meet this moment. However, hostile regulatory environments like those in California have shuttered critical refineries and deterred investment in new infrastructure. California used to be home to 40 refineries in the 1980s. This number has decreased to 14 as of last year, with 2 additional refineries that could close by early 2026. The anticipated closure of the Phillips 66 and Valero refineries will disrupt fuel supplies and increase energy prices. Further, a lack of pipeline connectivity, boutique blending requirements, gas taxes, and restrictive regulations have resulted in California becoming an energy island. In fact, the state imports over 60% of its crude oil from foreign countries like Iraq, Brazil, and Saudi Arabia. As energy companies choose to do business more in more reasonable states, Californians should unfortunately expect even higher fuel prices. It is important that we understand the challenges to increasing U.S. refining capacity. My bill, 3109, will require the National Petroleum Council to examine the role of our current refining fleet, opportunity to expand capacity, and detailed challenges and risks to those facilities. A lack of capacity along the West Coast has resulted in fuel price volatility in the region and increased the importation of fuel supplies, often coming from countries with significantly less stringent environmental and labor standards than the United States. We cannot let the rest of the country follow suit. Both LNG exports and U.S. refining capacity unequivocally benefit our economy, domestic prices, and allies around the world. I urge all of my colleagues to join me in supporting H.R. 1949 and H.R. 3109, and I thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Congressman Latta. Ranking Member Pallone, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairwoman Fox and Ranking Member McGovern and members of the committee. It turns out that 2 weeks after millions of Americans got notifications that their health insurance premiums are skyrocketing, that Republicans don't want to talk about how much health care costs are rising on their watch or the millions of families who now won't be able to afford it. They also don't want to talk about the fact that President Trump seems to have known exactly what Jeffrey Epstein was up to on his island. So instead, during our first week back from the Republican shutdown, we're here to talk about two energy bills that serve absolutely no one except the fossil fuel industry. In fact, one of them will shoulder Americans with higher energy costs and make the affordability crisis even worse. I don't see the logic in this, but I'm happy to point out some facts. The price of natural gas, which millions of people use to cook and heat their homes, is 15% higher than it was a year ago. And just since President Trump took office, the price of electricity has gone up 11% nationwide. I think it's pretty clear that President Trump's promise to cut power bills in half is just a broken campaign promise. Our country has experienced a cost of living crisis that's now jeopardizing one of our most crucial necessities, the ability to heat and cool our homes. But tragically, these cost increases are just the beginning. The big, beautiful bill, I call it the big, ugly bill that Republicans passed this summer, is projected to increase electricity prices by a staggering 60% on top of the rate hikes families have already endured. Earlier this year, one industry coalition letter called the Republican bill the, quote, single largest nationwide utility bill increase in American history. And that's because it's set to cut the deployment of clean, affordable American renewable energy in half. And that's not even mentioning the president's tariffs, which are a tax on Americans that will cost the average family about $2,000 a year. So now faced with a cost of living crisis of their own making, what do Republicans want to do? Well, they want to pass bills that would make the problem even worse. And not just a little bit, by a lot. The first bill, H.R. 1949, would allow unlimited exports of American liquid natural gas, or LNG, without asking the Department of Energy to figure out if these exports are in the public interest. Now, when we talk about the public interest that exists now that has to be cleared by the DOE before these kinds of exports take place, we're talking about prices, we're talking about strategic interests, and we're talking about environmental or climate interests. None of those would be reviewed anymore under this bill. It's just deemed in the public interest, and there's no reason to review it. Last year, DOE found that unlimited exports of LNG would increase natural gas prices by over 30% and cost households well over $100 a year. It's just common sense, in my opinion, that sending more of our energy resources abroad will send energy prices skyrocketing here at home. Then we have the other bill, H.R. 3109, which is just a complete waste of time. That bill directs the National Petroleum Council to write a report on the refinery industry. That's it, just a report. I mean, now reports are a big priority. I'd like to note that when he called the slack back here last week, the Speaker Johnson, threatened that we be working long hours into the night. That's his quote, and this is his quote. We look forward to the government reopening this week so Congress can get back to our regular legislative business. We have a lot of business to do. Well, I agree with the Speaker. We've got a lot of business to do, but That is not what we're doing here. I mean, a lot of businesses fixing the Republican healthcare crisis, addressing the rising cost of living, is crushing our constituents. I just think it's ridiculous that, after we're home for 7 weeks, the Republican leadership has brought us back to write on a bill that asks the National Petroleum Council for a study. So, Madam Chair, I don't think this is serious. We need to work on solutions to drive costs down, not ignore them, or worse, send them skyrocketing further. And that's what these bills would do. And with that, I yield back, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Pallone. I'm going to defer questioning myself. Ms. Fishbach, do you have any questions to recognize?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And just really quickly, because I know we've got a lot on the docket, and I will ask, on 1949, I'm trying to keep them straight, really what we're talking about in there is that it really streamlines things, and it makes it better to deal with the issue. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's correct.
And that makes a lot of sense, because when you're talking about prices, I mean, expenses have been cut. When you do streamline things, it will help. Is that not the way, what you're
Well,
looking at?
yeah, and thank you very much for the question, because it is really important, because again, when you think about the LNG exports, we want to make sure that two things. Number one, that we're producing the energy here in the United States, that we're also getting that energy across the globe to our friends. I know when I've spoken at different meetings with a lot of different foreign countries, they've all said the same thing. We want to buy U.S. LNG. They do not want to buy Russian LNG, and they say it for a particular reason. They say they don't want to support Putin's war. And so the United States can be out there doing what we can do best in making sure that we're putting a product out there. It's also cleaner than being produced from any place else in the world, and making sure that we're helping here domestically and also with our foreign policy.
Thank you very much. And then on 3109, there was some talk about why we needed the report. And so I'm going to ask you that maybe just give us a little explanation of why the report is needed.
Well, first of all, there hasn't been a report in 21 years. I think that's an important number right there. And number two is that as we see the increased demand in committee hearings that we've had, I've asked the same question. Do we have to have more energy or less energy in this country? And everybody has said the exact same thing. We have to have more energy being produced. Well, how are you going to refine it? And so what we're seeing is that, we haven't had a new refinery. They've been, adding on and trying to keep up with the demand. But we're seeing that the demand is keep increasing. And so we have to make sure that we have the refining capacity in this country to do it right here in this country.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate it. And thank you for the bills. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman Fishbach. Mr. McGovern, you're recognized.
Mr. Latter, as Mr. Pallone pointed out, electricity prices have gone up by 11% since President Trump took office. And just last week, the U.S. Energy Information Administration projected that natural gas prices will rise 16% next year, quote, primarily due to increased liquefied natural gas exports, end quote. So my question is, won't H.R. 1949 further increase LNG exports, which the EIA says will be a key driver in rising natural gas prices in the United States next year? And how is a bill that would help foreign entities import our oil and gas while raising prices for Americans be considered American first?
Well, thank you very much for the question. If we go back in just time, I can remember a day in the 1970s where they're telling us that we didn't have any energy left in this country. And we've been able to change that, and for the better. And it's because, right now we've become the number one natural gas producer in the world. We can outproduce Russia and Saudi Arabia in oil production on any given day. And what we've also seen is what we've heard in testimony before us in committee is a very simple fact. We're using a lot more energy in this country and a lot more electricity. And so what we've seen from when we've had the RTOs and the ISOs testifying before us, and those are all the regional companies, or like PJM that takes care of the Washington, D.C. and 13 other states, is that we've got to have more energy. But we've also seen numbers like in the last year. We were being told that because of the data centers coming online, that they'd be using about 4.5% to 6% of potential electricity and energy out there. And now we're seeing it's well over 10%. It's just going to keep increasing. So
do you
we want to make
dispute-
sure that we keep.
Do you dispute the U.S. Energy Information Administration's projection that natural gas prices will increase by 16%, primarily due to increased LNG exports? I mean, so you
No,
disagree with that?
I think, and again, I think it really comes down to that if we're not producing the energy in the fields and getting it from point A to point B, that we have to make sure that we have it out there.
So, all right, even if you think this bill is great, I guess this is a question I have. Why did Republicans pass it last year but never send it to the Senate? In fact, last Congress, Republicans passed 12 bills in the House that they never sent to the Senate, and that kind of baffles me. I'd imagine that if you actually wanted to change the law, you'd send the bill over to the Senate after you passed it in the House and not let it languish. I mean, have you asked the Speaker why he didn't send this bill to the Senate last year?
To the ranking member, we passed great legislation out of the Energy and Commerce Committee. And once it leaves the committee, I can't speak for what leadership did on the legislation.
Did you complain that he never sent it?
Again, I wasn't the chair of the committee, so I'm not sure what discussions were being made. It could very well have been made, but I wasn't privy to
Oh,
that.
do you know why they didn't send it?
I'm sorry, what was the question again? I wanted to say
I'm
something.
just wondering why
else.
this bill's so great that we passed it in the last Congress, but it was never sent to the Senate.
Well, because the Senate obviously thinks it's a bad idea. I mean,
Yeah, but we said, why not send it anyway? I mean, we send lots of, in this Congress, lots of bad bills to the Senate. I'm just wondering,
I mean, look, this is such a terrible bill. I can't blame anybody for not moving it or sending it. I mean, to be honest, I think that what we're seeing repeatedly with the Republican House in the last session and the Republican House now is they just, constantly pass bills that hurt the environment, make energy prices higher. It doesn't matter,
Mr. Lay, do you have any assurance that if this bill passes again, that the Speaker will actually send it to the Senate?
Yeah, to the ranking member, again, when the legislation leaves the Energy and Commerce Committee, it's a good, we've passed a very good piece of legislation. We're just waiting, hopefully that bill will then make its way over to the Senate.
I mean, do you believe it should be sent to the Senate? I mean,
Well, absolutely.
Okay,
I wouldn't be here today.
and I assume you'd be disappointed if the Speaker once again chose not to send it.
No, and again, I think that, what we've seen in the past is that we had a situation in this country where we weren't producing energy. And then we're in a situation today that we are producing energy.
I get it.
And again, when it comes to making sure that, once it leaves our committee, then that's the discussion that the leadership has.
I'm just wondering whether we're playing pretend Congress or whether we're playing real Congress. Because if this were real, you pass a bill here, and then we send it to the Senate and ask them to.
Well, I worked on pieces of legislation for a good number of years, and it might take several Congresses to get something through, but, we'll get it there.
Could I go back to answer a question you asked him earlier, that you asked Mr. Latta earlier? I wanted to answer a question that you asked him earlier, if possible.
How many questions ago are we talking about?
I don't know. I mean, the bottom line is, but
I
it's,
mean, the issue is whether or not this bill will actually increase energy prices here, as the
Yeah.
U.S. Energy Information Administration projected that the more we export, that prices will go up.
yeah. I mean, I would suggest to you, in response maybe to all your questions, that the reason the Speaker doesn't send it is because he thinks it's a lousy bill that not only increases energy prices, but it's totally unnecessary. I mean, just two things in that regard. One is that, first of all, the amount of permits that have been already approved by DOE for LNG are 3 times triple our what the export capacity is today. So the bottom line is, even if they never issued another permit, it would take us into the early 2030s before they could ever possibly export the level that is being advocated here. But beyond that, keep in mind that you can export right now to any country which we have a fair trade agreement with without going through this process. And the problem is now is China.
Yeah,
In
well,
other words, they want to export to China.
Right. Well,
That's the
let
problem.
me get two other quick questions here. Three other. One is, would you be opposed to an amendment that would require, if this bill gets passed, that it be mandatory, that it be required that it gets sent to the Senate?
I'm not sure.
I mean, I kind of feel like we're watching reruns
I
here.
guess my question is, how often does that ever occur?
Well, I mean, in the last Congress, we passed this bill, and then it never gets sent to the
Right,
Senate.
but I said, but
And so here we're back
this
again.
says
We're
something
gonna pass this bill.
Yeah, and again, I can't speak for leadership, but I know that one of the things I do know is this, is that if we want to make sure that the United States stays on top, that we have to make sure we have the right regulations out in the fields, that these people can be out there producing energy. What we did, what we've seen in the past, you put the stringent requirements out there to a point that we can't produce
I
energy,
guess I'm not
then we're
going to
not
get an answer
getting
to my
it.
question, but I'd like to ask unanimous consent to insert in the record a list of the 12 bills that we actually passed that everybody here said was so important that we passed and never got sent to the Senate. And in your committee, Mr. Pone just referred to it, Republicans blocked an amendment that would have allowed the Energy Secretary to block exports of LNG to China if he or she determines they harm the public interest. Why did Republicans oppose that amendment?
Off the top of my head, I can't quite remember the exact rationale, but I know this, is that if the Chinese become more dependent on buying from us, they're not getting it from some other source, maybe if it's like a Russia or someplace else. So it also helps on our trade side because of the imbalance there. So it makes them more dependent on us.
Well, I don't think the Energy Secretary is some flaming liberal here, but my question would be, according to this amendment, the Energy Secretary could only block exports of LNG to China if he or she determined that they harm the public interest. I'm just trying to understand, like, why is that a bad idea? I mean, if the Energy Secretary determines that exporting LNG to China is not in the public interest of people here in the United States, Republicans blocked it. I'm just trying to, is there a reason?
And again, I can't go back in memory to that exact moment, but as I mentioned before, that it's important that the United States, if we're selling the energy to China, they're not getting it from someplace else, and they're more dependent on the United States.
And just the final quick, because Mr. Goose is, I think, stuck on a plane, but he brought this up last time. Because the last time we met on bills in your committee's jurisdiction, it was to vote on a bill to reestablish a coal council, even though the Trump administration has already reestablished that council in June. But when we met in September, Mr. Neguse pointed out that the council had been reestablished in name only. On its website, if you went to the current members tab, it said, quote, coming soon. Well, I just went to the website this morning, and it still says coming soon. So it's been five months since Trump's announcement, 2 months since you passed your bill, and still there does not appear to be a council. Do you have any update for us on the happenings of the National Coal Council, which Republicans have all said is incredibly important to get up and running? And that was one of the reasons why we dealt with your legislation only a few months ago. Do you have any update on?
Well, I'll do this. I'll get back to the ranking member on that. I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, because, I mean, here's the website, and it still says coming soon. So anyway, okay, well, I appreciate it, and I yield back.
No, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Ms. Houchin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to Chairman Lotta, Ranking Member Pallone for being here. From day one, the Trump administration has worked to reverse the disastrous energy policies of the Biden administration, unleashing American energy production and reducing our dependence on our foreign adversaries. Finally, after 4 long years of failed leadership under President Biden, we once again have a president who understands that energy security is national security. Under current law, any entity wishing to export U.S. natural gas must gain approval to construct and operate LNG facilities, obtain multiple federal and state permits, and undergo a rigorous regulatory review. As if that process wasn't burdensome enough, the Biden administration announced an indefinite ban on issuing export permits to non-free trade agreement countries while it reviewed the climate impacts of U.S. LNG, surrendering to radical climate activists and effectively kneecapping one of America's most powerful economic and geopolitical tools. This legislation builds on the common sense policies of the Trump administration by removing unnecessary restrictions on the export of natural gas by eliminating the requirement for the Department of Energy to authorize LNG exports and instead giving the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission sole authority over the approval process. Congressman Latta, do you agree that as a result of President Biden's freeze, Russia surpassed the U.S. as Europe's leading gas supplier, as documented at the time?
Oh, that's absolutely correct. And again, if I just can reiterate, one of the things, again, what our European allies have all said, they want to buy from the United States. They do not want to buy from Russia and pay for his war against Ukraine.
And how does that serve our national security or our allies if the United States is not a leader in these exports?
Well, the United States should be a leader. It's absolutely essential because, again, if the United States is leading and then the rest of the world is saying, you know what, we want the United States out there, and that's what they've all said. You talk to these countries from around the world, they say they don't want it when it comes to Russia or any place else. If they can get it from the United States, because not only do they know that they're not being held hostage, but they also know this, is that they're making sure that they're not financing wars that they'll end up, could very likely be next in. So they really see the United States as the leader out there.
So under the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, the United States was energy independent and was a net positive exporter of energy for the first time in 40 years. Under the Biden administration, LNG exports were stopped, as I mentioned before, under pressure from climate activists. We've heard from some of our colleagues yet this afternoon that if we try to increase exports of natural gas, it might drive up costs for consumers. However, history will tell us that the Biden halt of exports from liquid natural gas only resulted in a less than 1% discount on residential rates, yet it costs the United States in terms of our GDP. The industry itself is an economic engine accounting for about $408 billion in GDP since 2016. Madam Chairwoman, I'd like to insert for the record an article posted on API.org, Facts Not Fiction, the False Narrative on LNG Exports and U.S. Residential Prices.
Without objection.
So the International Energy Agency does project global gas demand will reach record highs. Why is it important for the United States to fill that demand? And you've mentioned some of these reasons, as opposed to our adversaries like Iran or Russia. In my view, the United States can and should be a leader and a net exporter of our energy portfolio, and this legislation is a step in that direction. Do you agree?
I absolutely agree with that.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Ms. Scanlon, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess my constituents and I were naive when we thought that after a 7-week vacation for our colleagues, that when we came back to Congress, we would be addressing the most important issues for the American people: healthcare and housing affordability, addressing government corruption. I mean, there's no shortage of issues that we should be working on, but looks like we're doomed to disappointment. So this panel, we've got, families in Pennsylvania and across the country who are being squeezed by higher energy costs, but we're considering several bills whose major purpose is to give handouts to the fossil fuel industry, make it easier for them to make bank. HR 1949 strips the Department of Energy of its ability to consider issues affecting my constituents and the country as a whole, issues like consumer prices, the environmental impact, and the strategic national interests of our country. This means the impact of this bill is to have more exports tied to global price swings, fewer consumer safeguards, exactly the opposite of what families in my district need when their energy bills are already too high. The Department of Energy's own analysis and independent experts have warned that unfettered LNG exports can raise domestic prices and increase volatility. We should be protecting our ratepayers, not exposing them to higher costs. The Refiner Act, HR 3109, instructs the Oil and Gas Advisory Council to submit a report to Congress on the oil and gas industry. So that's not neutral policy. That's outsourcing policymaking to an industry-led council instead of independent experts. So it does not appear that these bills prioritize the best interests of the American people, or certainly my constituents. Last Congress, we passed historic legislation to invest in clean energy. We lowered energy costs across the board and set the stage for a future with less pollution and more reliable electricity generation. But Trump and the Republican-led Congress have undone large parts of that critical legislation to provide billionaires with tax breaks. And now they're going forward with this legislation, which will enrich corporations, increase the pollution poisoning our air and water, and worsen the climate crisis. So I'm obviously not a big fan of this legislation, but Ranking Member Pallone, can you talk a little bit about the concerns about the environment and the costs for consumers, and why exporting more LNG is likely to raise profits for the fossil fuel industry, but also to raise prices for Americans?
Absolutely, and I appreciate your question. Look, the only country that's benefiting from this is China, right? And other adversaries, right? Because right now, as I said, something like the DOE has allowed permits to triple the amount of LNG. And, you know, if you're worried about our allies like Europe, I mean, this takes you to 2032, right? The Europeans are not worried that they're not getting enough LNG under the current permits that have been approved. The problem is that for countries that are not, for which we don't have a free trade agreement, right, they need to go through this permit process, which looks at the price, the impact of the price on Americans, the impact on the environment and climate, and also on our strategic interests. So if you eliminate that permit process, which is essentially what this bill does, then they never look to see whether increased exports to China, for example, could be other adversaries, are beneficial or could possibly harm us, right? And the president is going around hawking the fact that we could send more LNG to China. I mean, he doesn't pretend that that's not what he's up to. He makes it clear every day. He says, I want to sell more LNG to China. He says it outright, okay? So what you're saying is absolutely true. In other words, when you send all the LNG abroad, all the documentation proves that the price here goes up because it becomes a shortage here, right? But it's not just the price. The price is bad enough, but it's also the strategic national interest. It's the impact on climate. It's the impact on the environment. Who is benefiting from this? Right. Just our adversaries, right? And China is the best example because the more we send to them, the more they're going to, use it, and in my opinion, for purposes that are not helpful to us. That's what this is all about. And the ultimate irony of it is that I hear my colleagues on the committee, not you sometimes, but some of the others even more, talk about China, China, China. Oh, we got to stick up to China. We got to have tariffs on China. We have to have this, right? Well, why in the world would you allow this to occur? I know the president wants to send it to China, but we shouldn't be. It's not in our interest.
I mean, I think you're laying out really well the strategic national interest, but the calls I get in my office are about people's concerns about not being able to afford their energy bills.
Sure.
And concerns about the environmental impact of running LNG lines through their neighborhoods.
And the
So-
irony is that, as you know, during his campaign, the president said over and over again, I am going to cut electricity prices in half. I think he even said in the first day or the first week. And they keep climbing every day. And this will only contribute to it.
Well, and what I find most offensive about this legislation is it basically puts not just a thumb on the scale, but a fist, and says, we are not even going to look at the things that Americans are most concerned about. We're just going to say, nope, we're assuming that all this is going to be good for Americans, despite the evidence to the contrary, and we're just going to look at how to make it better for oil companies and natural gas companies. So I object to legislation that puts the blinders on Congress when it comes to how we should be legislating. With that, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Scanlon. Mr. Scott, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I just go back to the opening comments, and I got to ask this. Mr. Malone, did you help write the Affordable Care Act?
Did I what? I'm sorry.
Did you help write the Affordable Care Act, or did you just vote for it?
Actually, not only was I one of the drafters, but I'm the only one left.
Okay.
There were 6 of us. The chair
Okay.
at the time of the full.
Okay, well, okay, great. So maybe you can explain this to me then.
Sure.
So I went to the pharmacist this weekend, and I'm covered under the Affordable Care or Obamacare. I went to the pharmacist. It was Friday, and it's cheaper for me to pay cash at the pharmacy than to actually use the Affordable Care Act. So why would you write a piece of legislation that mandated that the American citizens buy a contract when, if you use it, your copay is literally more than the cash price of the prescription drug? I'm just wondering why you would draft a piece of legislation that did that.
Well, all I can tell you is that, whenever I go to the pharmacy, it's just the opposite. If you want to pay cash, it's a lot more expensive.
Oh, I think the American citizens would probably recognize that that's not true. The way y'all drafted the contract, it was a gift to the insurance industry, and it's actually cheaper to pay cash for most drugs than it is to.
I haven't seen that to be the case
Well,
at all.
let me ask you one more, because I got a charge right here, and if it wasn't so sad, it would be funny. But last charge was $111. This is for an outpatient appointment, and the balance I owed on this contract that you wrote that we're mandated to be covered under, I had to pay $60 of the $111. Do you want to guess how much the insurance company paid?
You could tell me what you want.
Yeah, the insurance company paid $7.99. Now, there's another $43.01 that they simply took out of the provider reimbursement. And so, I mean, those of you who actually wrote the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, you talk about a healthcare crisis. We absolutely have a healthcare crisis in this country. But those of you who wrote that contract that does those types of things, it was nothing other than a gift to the insurance industry. When you look in the mirror, you're looking at the person that created the healthcare crisis in that country. Madam Chair, with that, I yield.
Well, Mr. Scott, can I just say one thing in response? I don't know anybody who would prefer to not have health insurance and pay cash. I just don't. But that's my experience.
Thank you, Mr. Pallone. Mr. Griffith, you're recognized.
Madam Chair, it's always good to see my colleagues from Energy and Commerce with us. I wasn't planning on saying anything, but Mr. Scott got me going. And so let me say this. I'm not sure it's most drugs, but there are certainly a fair number of drugs. And my colleagues may remember that a couple of years ago, we had a bill passed out of Energy and Commerce. I don't remember the vote. I don't keep score like that. That's not my nature. Don't remember the vote, but I had a bill because I see the insurance companies as fiduciaries for their enrolled subscribers, and tried to reverse the situation that Mr. Scott just raised, because it does exist on many drugs. I can't say it's most. I can't tell you what percentage it is, but it's a significant number, where the insurance company pays, in his example, it was $7.99, and yet the copay was 30 or 60. I forget which. That was on a physician charge. Oh, physician charge. All right. But that happens enough that I put the bill through and Energy and Commerce passed it. Unfortunately, Ways and Means thought I was trying to price control. And all I was trying to do was recognize that there is a fiduciary, in my opinion, and I think it's accurate, a fiduciary relationship between an insurance company and their enrollee, whether it be paid for by the enrollee themselves or by their employer on their behalf, and that the insurance company should not charge more in their copay than what they charged or what they paid for a particular prescription. That bill's still floating around out there. Maybe we can get another shot at it before this term is up, but that makes sense to me. So I'm just addressing the point previously raised. I disagree with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle when it comes to energy. The more energy we can produce, the better. Exports will not, as the gentleman pointed out, they will not have a significant impact for a long time on, at least that was my recollection of his comments, on the gas being produced will not be exported as fast as we might want it to be. But the only dilemma with that would be then that the price in the United States would come down even further. Although it's interesting, the price doesn't fluctuate that much based on current supply. It deals more with what's going on in the world economy. But I would just say that I disagree with my colleagues and think that these are good bills, and would say to my colleagues on Energy and Commerce, I look forward to discussing these and other issues with you as we move forward this year, and I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Jack.
Well, I agree with the gentleman from Virginia. I, too, like both of these bills. And our colleagues mentioned affordability. And that's certainly something we've heard and seen in the news for the last 2 weeks. So, Mr. Latta, in closing, I would welcome your thoughts on not only how both of these bills will help lower costs for Americans, but likewise how they'll make America more affordable for our fellow countrymen.
Well, thank you very much for the question. And again, we have to be producing. We've got to go out and produce, because the more we produce, the better it is. If we're in a situation where we can't get out there and get the energy and get it up, and or if they don't have any place to be able to move it to, is going to be another problem. They're going to say, well, now we're going to have to close down wells because they don't have a market. So by producing more and more energy, that's better, not only for the United States, but for our allies out there. So that's why, and it's also on the production side, but it's also when you think about on the refining side, you got to refine it. And it's just not, some people always have to remember, it's just not refining it into gasoline. But, we just got through the harvest season, and, the farmers are out there, you're going to start thinking about the petrochemicals out there they're going to need in the future, that they're going to have on for their crops. So it's important that we have that there for them. And because my district right now is the largest farm income producing district in the state of Ohio. I've got 86,000 manufacturing jobs. And I've said it in the Rules Committee before, and I'll say it again. It's just not that we have energy, but it's got to be affordable. And that's what is so important in making sure that those 86,000 people across the 5th District have jobs, is that when they go to work every day, they know that they've got the energy, they can produce a product that's going to be affordable and be competitive, not only in this country, but around the world.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you and Mr. Pallone for testifying, and I will yield back to the chairwoman.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Well, thank both of you.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Norman, I almost forgot you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay. I want to thank both of you for being here. The facts are the facts. President Trump took over in January of 25. If you look at the price of gas, in 2025, it was $3.19 per gallon, down from $3.29 a gallon the month prior, and down from $3.26 last year of the Biden administration. I think we forget, too, the fact that the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in March of 2022, the Biden administration sold off 180 million barrels in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which were meant for hurricanes, disasters, and it took it to a 40-year low. I think the capacity is around 714 million barrels. What this administration did to sacrifice the security of this country and embolden Russia is unfathomable. So I like these two bills. Facts are the facts. Every gas is coming down as never before. And these two bills will help take the regulations that should have never been there in the first place. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I apologize. I went down that way and forgot you were here. Gentlemen, I think there are no further questions for you. We thank you very much for coming, and you are dismissed.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I now welcome our second panel. Chairman Westerman and Representative Elfrith from the Committee on Natural Resources. Your full statement will be submitted for the record, and we ask you to summarize your statement in 5 minutes. Chairman Westerman, I welcome your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Fox. It's great to be here at the Rules Committee again, taking care of the people's business. I want to thank you for this opportunity to testify. The three CRAs we're considering today are a continuation of our efforts to reverse some misguided resource management plans, or RMPs, which were finalized during the last administration. These RMPs bypassed Congress, ignored local input, and locked up huge swaths of our federal lands and mineral resources. SJ Resolution 80, introduced by Senator Dan Sullivan, mirrors HJ Resolution 124, introduced by Representative Begich from Alaska. The legislation would undo the 2022 Integrated Activity Plan, or the IAP, for the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska, also known as the NPR-A. The Biden administration's IAP for the NPR-A locked up nearly 50% of the NPR-A to oil and gas leasing. The U.S. Geological Survey estimates that the NPR-A contains about 8.7 billion barrels of oil and 25 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. The development of these resources will support American energy needs and is essential to the livelihoods of Alaska Native communities across the state. Since Alaska gained statehood, oil and natural gas production have contributed over $180 billion in total revenue and typically account for up to 90% of the state's unrestricted general fund revenue. In fiscal year 2022, Alaskan oil and natural gas production generated $4.5 billion in state and local revenue and supported over 69,250 direct and indirect jobs. In addition, Alaska receives 50% of the bonuses, rents, and royalties derived from oil and gas production in the NPR-A. Strong support for energy production in the NPR-A has been expressed by North Slope Native voices who highlight the significant economic opportunities energy production provides to the Arctic and Yup'ik tribes that live on the North Slope of Alaska. Despite the significant contributions that NPR-A oil and gas production makes to the state and local economies, the last administration recklessly moved to stymie oil and gas production within the NPR-A. Congress must now act to overturn the 2022 IEP that threatens the livelihoods of those who call the North Slope home. Overturning the IEP would open an additional 6.8 million acres for oil and gas leasing and allow access to an additional 2.3 million acres for new infrastructure supporting local communities and tribes, all while maintaining a proven approach that successfully manages the resources of the NPR-A. Next, we have HJ Res 131, offered by Representative Begich, which would repeal a Biden-era record of decision, or ROD, restricting oil and gas production on 1.16 million acres within the 1002 area of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, also known as ANWR. The U.S. Geological Survey previously estimated that the coastal plain contains between 4.25 and 11.8 billion barrels of recoverable oil. Based in part on this fact, Congress specifically set aside the 1002 area of ANWR for its oil and gas potential, and Congress has twice mandated energy leasing in the area with the support of North Slope communities located within ANWR. The importance of the 1002 area to the economic livelihoods of those residing within the area cannot be overstated. The current administration has recognized this and earlier this year acted to reopen the coastal plain within ANWR to oil and gas leasing. On October 23rd of this year, the Inupiat leadership of Kaktovik, the lone indigenous tribal community within ANWR, praised Interior's policy and reiterated the community's need for resource development income. Kaktovik Inupiat Corporation President Charles C.C. Lampe said in a statement, quote, "It is vital that Katovik's perspective be listened to and reflected in federal policy that directly impacts our ancestral homelands." In addition, he said, "It is encouraging to see decision makers in Washington advancing policies that respect our voice and support Kaktovik's long-term success." During President Trump's first administration, consistent with federal law and local voices, the Department of the Interior finalized plans to make all 1.56 million acres of the coastal plain available to oil and gas leasing. However, in 2024, the administration disregarded congressional intent and local voices and reversed course, implementing a restrictive plan that made it available minimal acreage for energy leasing. Repealing the 2024 ROD will enable the 1002 area to reach its true energy potential, which is crucial for our national security as well as the area's infrastructure needs, including Arctic roads, airports, telecommunications, and ports, all of which link to the oil and gas industry or the revenue generated from it. Lastly, H.J. Res. 130, offered by Representative Harriet Hageman, would overturn the disastrous Buffalo Field Office RMP amendment, which needlessly blocked up to 800,000 acres of land and 4.7 million acres of minerals in the heart of Wyoming coal country. When paired with the pro-energy policies and the Working Families Tax Cut Law, overturning this RMP amendment would unleash American mining, generating over $260 million in revenue for the U.S. Treasury, improving energy affordability, and reducing our national debt by maintaining access to more than 48 billion short tons of coal. This is enough coal to meet the U.S. demand for the next century and beyond. Failing to overturn the Buffalo RMP amendment would result in the loss of hundreds of millions of dollars for Wyoming's K-12 public education system and more than 4,000 high-paying jobs in rural Wyoming. The Navajo Transitional Energy Company, which is wholly owned by the Navajo Nation, expounded on the importance of these jobs in a letter they wrote to the BLM before the agency finalized the Buffalo RMP amendment, stating, quote, "These positions are not seasonal or transitional jobs, but enduring careers that enable workers to earn wages to support their families as a sole income earner and to support extended family. The economic impacts of coal mines within the planning area extend beyond their employees, permeating throughout the community and significantly contributing to overall economic self-sufficiency. The immense value of coal mining, which is projected to average about $2 billion per year, is the essential nucleus for a robust economic system." In addition to the Navajo Transitional Energy Company, the RMP amendment was opposed by Wyoming's governor, congressional delegation, locally elected officials, and energy stakeholders. In fact, the BLM did not receive a single letter of support for the Buffalo RMP amendment. Every single letter they received was one of opposition. I want to thank Representatives Hageman and Begich for their leadership in advancing these important resolutions. As representatives of some of the most rural states in our nation, they are giving their constituents a strong voice in Congress. I urge the committee to report an appropriate rule so the Congressional Review Act resolutions can be considered in the House. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. Ms. Elfreth, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ranking Member McGovern, members of the committee. I'm here today on behalf of Ranking Member Huffman in opposition to the 3 CRAs that would overturn Bureau of Land Management plans in Wyoming and Alaska, including the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Across the country, plans like these are foundational documents for the stewardship of our federal lands. Agencies like BLM develop these plans through years of collaborative, transparent processes that incorporate science, law, and robust public input. These documents guide activities from energy development and grazing to recreation and conservation, reflecting the unique needs of communities, industries, and ecosystems. By law, BLM must prioritize multiple uses of public lands, managing these lands for future generations by balancing at the same time the needs of today. The resolutions before you would not only overturn these plans, but critically prohibit the Bureau from issuing any substantially similar plans in the future. If they pass, millions of acres of public lands in Wyoming and Alaska would be locked into reckless fossil fuel development for the foreseeable future. SJ Res 80 would overturn a plan for the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska that balances oil and gas development with the protection of 13 million acres of delicate ecosystems in the Western Arctic. The name National Petroleum Reserve is misleading. This area is not simply a vast, untapped oil field. The lands are critical habitat for countless species, including migratory birds and caribou. Tribes have relied on these lands for subsistence for thousands of years, and scientists continue to study the archaeology and paleontology of the land to learn more about our shared history. The CRA would also undo decades of collaborative efforts with local, state, tribal, and federal stakeholders by permanently and unilaterally ceding millions of acres of land to oil and gas development. HJ Res 130 would repeal the court-ordered resource management plan amendment for the BLM Buffalo Field Office in Wyoming in order to open approximately 500,000 additional acres of federal land to coal mining. This amended plan you are being asked to overturn was developed by 17 separate tribal nations and 11 local, state, and federal partner agencies. Further, BLM has already noticed their intent to amend the RMP with the scoping and public comment period just this past summer. The CRA would not only cancel out years of work and input from countless stakeholders, but it would prevent BLM from continuing the work they started just this year under this administration to amend the plan within the confines of the law. HJ Res 131, which would overturn a land management decision for the coastal plain of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, is similarly unnecessary. The Department of the Interior has already placed the record of decision for the coastal plain in Alaska just last month, in addition to the language of H.R. 1 and the executive order, which made over 150 million acres of this land eligible for lease sale. So what is the point if these rules are already either replaced or in the process of being amended by agencies and stakeholders? Why are we spending precious congressional time arguing these CRAs? This is not about energy dominance, and there is nothing in these CRAs to ensure any energy produced would even benefit Americans, let alone the communities that are most impacted by these land management decisions. I agree with Chair Westerman that our nation is in the midst of an affordability crisis, with over half of Americans living paycheck to paycheck and energy bills continuing to climb. But the resources extracted on the lands in these CRAs would by and large be sent overseas to both our allies, but importantly our adversaries. And it was discussed on the last panel, but we are literally fueling our adversaries without protections on who we sell to. The real challenges to energy affordability, like transmission, generation, grid reliability, or renewable energy development, continue to go unaddressed by this Congress. These CRAs are picking winners and losers, not only favoring certain industries and land users, but also deciding which stakeholders get to have their voices heard in these decisions impacting their communities, cultures, sacred lands, and livelihoods. We already have processes in place to help ensure public input and balanced land management decisions, which this administration is literally actively using on some of the policies we're discussing today. By passing these CRAs, Congress is silencing thousands of stakeholders, from tribal nations to local landowners, who help shape each land management plan. These resolutions send a clear message. Local needs will be disregarded if they don't align with fossil fuel industry's interests. And as I said when I was here last July, testifying on similar CRAs, I submit that the Congressional Review Act is the wrong tool to address policy differences with these management plans. It cuts out the public, and it forever locks that agency into inflexible policy decisions. I urge my colleagues to reject these reckless resolutions and that would upend carefully crafted and balanced public land management plans. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield.
Thank you all so much for your testimony. And now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott, for his time of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have a whole lot of questions on these issues. Certainly support them. Mr. Westerman, do you have anything that you would like to add at this stage?
Well, thank you, Representative Scott. You know, when we talk about a CRA, the only way you can have a CRA is when an administration makes a rule that Congress says that's a bad rule, we're going to revoke it. And it was the administration that was picking, they were picking who the losers were when it comes to these three specific issues. And it's Congress stepping in and saying, no, you can't do that, and we're going to do a CRA. And when we do a CRA, it takes that off of the table for future bureaucrats in the administration to do the same thing.
Thank you, and I yield.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, for his time.
Thank you. I'm going to be very brief because, again, I had hoped that after 7 or 8 weeks out that we would have come back and actually be taking up legislation that would have make a meaningful difference in the lives of my constituents in terms of lowering costs of a whole range of things, because life is too damn expensive in this country, and it's getting more and more expensive under this administration. But let me just ask one question, Ms. Elfreth. Is it true that oil and gas industry experts across the political spectrum agree that the use of the CRA on land use plans creates regulatory and legal ambiguity?
That is true. In fact, the Trump administration's former nominee for the BLM, Catherine Sugama, said there, quote, there could be some legal risks introduced and bad legal precedent when using CRAs on land management plans. She was formerly not just the nominee for the director, but she led the Western Energy Alliance and Oil and Gas Trade Association and testified in front of the House Natural Resources for the majority. So yes, I think we're in legally murky waters here, in addition to permanently handcuffing BLM from substantially similar decisions moving forward.
I thank you for your answer. And again, let me just say, at a local restaurant, here, and the waiter was telling me about how he just received notice that his health care costs are going to double, and wants to know what we're going to do about it. And while everybody can pontificate on the perfect health care system that we'd like to see in this country, and I have my own ideas, we have an immediate crisis, and that we're not focused on that right now, and we're doing this stuff. It seems that this Congress is tone deaf, and I would hope that we could find a way to, now, figure out a way to extend the tax credits, and then we can have these other conversations about the affordability of prescription drugs. And I'm with you if you want to hold the insurance companies accountable. I'm with you on that. But I mean, we have a crisis this second, and that we're not dealing with that in this committee right now. I think is unfortunate. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and now recognize the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Scanlon, for her time of questioning.
Thank you. As I noted with the last panel, once again, we have Congress substituting the judgment of the fossil fuel industry and Republican donors for the considered judgment of the experts and the community members who spent, as I understand it, substantial time and energy coming up with the Bureau of Land Management plans that Congress would now just cast out without so much as consulting the folks most directly interested in it. And it just, as you mentioned, is really questionable legally about doing it this way, but also creates these really huge practical issues where none of this is going to lower costs for the American people. It's not going to address the healthcare crisis. Doesn't cut a dime from families' monthly expenses, and the uncertainty that it injects into the process for developers, what's going to happen with cleanup costs, shifting industry risks onto the American people once again. It is not a good use of congressional legislation. I think the American people deserve policy that respects their health and their interest in wildlife, cultural resources, local economies, as opposed to privileging extraction over absolutely everything else. So could you just, Ms. Elfreth, talk a little bit about what goes into crafting these policies and why it's going to inject uncertainty?
Sure, years in some cases, which may be too long, but I think it's a robust process of, again, local, state, federal government agencies, dozens at a time, tribal nations, particularly in these two, Alaska and in Wyoming, and a careful negotiation, a balancing of land use policies. Many of us came from local government or state houses. We appreciate how challenging land use policy is. There are lots of demands on that land use. One of them certainly is conservation when we're talking about such sensitive areas of the world. I mean, the Arctic Wildlife Refuge is one of the most sensitive areas in the entire world. And all of these are balanced through a process that has that robust public input. What the CRAs are doing is throwing that entire process out. And again, what's odd is that this administration, the Trump administration, is in the midst of renegotiating those anyway. I mean, they're going back through the process because they disagreed with the Biden administration discussions. I don't have a problem with that if it's done through the correct process. What the CRAs are doing is Congress is just silencing all of that work.
Yeah, I think that's the part that's really so troubling, is just saying we're not going to pay attention to anyone's interests other than the fossil fuel industry. Does the industry have a say in the development of the land management plans?
As any stakeholder would.
Okay.
Yes, but also I think demand is an interesting topic as well in terms of how difficult some of these places are to actually conduct extraction, and whether there's actually going to be buyers or bidders is up in the air.
So instead of having a project or a process where the variety of interests at stake are balanced, this is just Congress, once again, putting a sledgehammer on the scale and saying, no, we're only going to pay attention to the industries.
And listen, I'd like to believe I'm a balanced legislator, like we all like to believe. And if there were restrictions ensuring that any energy produced under these CRAs would go directly to benefit and tackle the affordability crisis all of our communities and constituents are experiencing, I would be apt to sit down at the table and talk about that. But as has been clearly said, there are currently no restrictions on selling this energy to our literal adversaries, fueling our adversaries, not keeping that benefit. But that destruction is going to be in our communities and in this country. But the benefit isn't necessarily coming back home.
It does seem like it's created a very one-sided process, and that's why I'll be a no vote. Thank you for your testimony. I yield back.
And now I recognize Ms. Leisure Fernandez for her time of questioning.
Good afternoon, Chair, and my apologies for the nature of travel these days. But, you know, even though we're now on our second panel, it strikes me that neither this panel nor the one before addressed the issue that is on all voters' mind, which is how do we lower the cost of groceries? How do we lower the cost of affording health care and the insurance premiums that go along with it? How do we lower the cost of utilities, right? This month's elections told us that voters want us to lower the cost of utilities, and none of these bills do that. In fact, they move in the opposite direction. The other concerning thing about what we're considering in this panel is how we are dictating from DC. We are overturning careful consideration, as you have pointed out, about these bills. And with regards to the comment and the questions earlier from the ranking member about what it means out there, I would like to, I love to enter into the record items. Since you're here, I would like to enter into the record an article called, "Could Congress' use of this law create, open quote, Wild West, close quote, for public land management," published September 19th, 2025 in the Deseret News.
Without objection?
And this article, which comes from Utah, right? A place that we might not see as like a New Mexico, where we really do want to preserve both the ability to extract oil and gas, since that's important, but also the ability to protect land, and most importantly, the ability to have the input from community. And this actually points out that not only could it create the Wild West, but this quote, what is clear is that rescinding management plans under the CRA, which has never been done before, right, would open a Pandora's box of legal and regulatory uncertainty, one that could affect every permit, lease, and management decision made on public lands since the law went into effect, and that law was the CRA. Do you want to add some more to that, Ranking Member?
Oh, well, I would just want to, I think certainty, and let's just take the side of the, for kicks, let's take the side of the oil and gas industry here for this purpose of the conversation. Certainty is incredibly important. And so by using the CRA for this purpose, what we're saying is a future change in administration, presidential administration, could say, disagree with these and switch back, and we're going to see investment from the private sector diminish. I mean, the certainty is, when we talk about lowering costs for our constituents, certainty in industry is really important too. And using this tool creates this complete chaos for both industry and our constituents.
Right, and I would also point out that I've actually been to the Arctic Circle, been to these lands, and anybody who's gone there and witnessed the breathtaking beauty of these lands, seen those caribou migrate, and understand that those caribou only migrate in the numbers that they are, the porcupine herd, because there isn't the kind of development that they are seeking now. that everywhere else where there are roads and pipelines, they are decimating the caribou herds that so many rely on for not just subsistence, but also their cultural value. And I would also seek to enter into the record unanimous consent an October 14, 2025 press release from the Gwich'in Nation, which condemns the use of the CRA for this purpose.
Without objection, so ordered.
And with that, you know, I'm going to close. I think this idea of we are going to dictate from DC and overturn in a couple of weeks. This legislation was just, you know, we were all off doing not much, but we didn't have really any hearings on it, right? So we weren't here, we weren't doing anything. This gets introduced, and like that, years of work and consultation are overturned. This idea of constantly dictating from DC, I just have to vote against. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Gentlelady yields back, and now I'll take my time. Mr. Chairman, is there anything you wanted to add or any comments you want to say in closing?
Well, there's a lot I want to add, and I've got some stuff to submit to the record as well, but thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, you know, let's talk about community input. Let's talk about tribal input. If we look at the Buffalo Field Office Management Plan, the Navajo Transitional Energy Company submitted comments, and I want to submit their letter to the record, but NTEC...
What's the date of their letter?
The date of their letter is August 3rd, 2023.
All right, without objection, so ordered.
So in their letter, they talk about how NTEC is a single-member limited liability company wholly owned by the Navajo Nation. They provided detailed comments during the comment period for the draft SEIS. Unfortunately, after reviewing the RMPA, it's clear BLM dismissed all of NTEC's comments, and NTEC is protesting the resource management plan. That's the Wyoming CRA. Let's go to Alaska for a minute. When the public comment period was scheduled for Alaska, the Biden administration scheduled that during fishing season, where the people who would have commented on it weren't even there.
I figured.
So you've got that going on. Now let's talk about affordability. Mr. Chairman, if I was to ask you what big city in our country is running out of energy, you probably wouldn't expect Anchorage, Alaska to make that list. But they're literally running out of natural gas in Anchorage, Alaska. On the North Slope, there's not just billions of cubic feet of natural gas, there's trillions of cubic feet of natural gas. Tapping into that natural gas will definitely help affordability in Anchorage, Alaska. It's also enough gas that we can export it to our allies in Southeast Asia who are currently buying natural gas from Russia. So there's a big affordability and a national defense nexus to utilizing these resources that we have on the North Slope. A lot of this gas has already been produced since the 1970s when the oil was being produced, and there was no pipeline or market for it, so it's just up there in the ground waiting to be piped down to Anchorage and out to the Cook Inlet so that it can be exported. So those kinds of stories can be replicated across our country when it comes to affordability and benefiting American consumers and in making our national defense stronger.
And as a person who's very interested in nature, as you are, am I correct that this can be done with modern technology without disrupting the ecology of the region?
Yeah, and I've had the chance to go to the North Slope as well, and there are a lot of caribou up there. And you know where you can see them? They're huddled around the Alaska pipeline because the warm oil in it draws them close to that pipeline. It's also literally a postage stamp on the North Slope, a very, very small developed area that has minimal disruption to the ecosystem there. So the great thing about this resource is we can tap it with very little environmental disturbance.
All right. I don't have any additional questions. Any final comments, Mr. Chairman? Go ahead.
I have no further comments.
I appreciate both our witnesses being with us today, and that concludes this panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll give them a minute to clear out, and then we'll welcome our third panel. Are we ready for the third panel? We'll take a brief pause as we look for our witnesses. It's hard to have a third panel without the witnesses. If you don't object, we'll just say all their language is approved. Now, we will now come back to order, and I welcome our third panel. We have Chairman Hill, and if she's able to make it, and we understand people have travel issues and so forth, Ranking Member Waters from the Committee on Financial Services. Your full statements will be submitted for the record, and we ask that you summarize your statement in 5 minutes. Chairman Hill, I welcome your testimony.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member McGovern. It's good to be back in business in the Rules Committee and delighted to be with you tonight. I want to thank my great colleague, our great new member of the House Financial Services Committee from Florida, Congresswoman Salazar, for the opportunity to testify today on this resolution, which condemns the atrocities of socialism and warns of the implications it poses to our society. I was taught from an early age to be grateful for our gift here in America of freedom. While attending elementary school in Little Rock, one of my favorite teachers was a young Cuban exile mother who taught us Spanish. Before settling in Arkansas, her family fled the Castro regime, an authoritarian government known for its brutally murdering thousands of political prisoners and Cuban citizens. Castro ripped families from their farms, businesses, and private property and repressed his people. Castro's socialist regime systematically destroyed one of the most beautiful countries in the world while stripping the people of their individual freedoms. While a young business person, I witnessed the brutality of state control when at the height of the Cold War in 1986, I joined a U.S. Army-led tour of East Berlin. Passing west to east through the incredibly infamous Berlin Wall of concrete, barbed wire, and machine guns through the infamous Checkpoint Charlie, I saw the stark contrast between West Berlin's full-color freedom versus East Berlin's black and white, cruel socialism and communism. The difference in treatment of citizens was unmistakable. On one side, the West had vibrant storefronts, bustling with employees and patrons, and all of its shelves fully stocked. And on the other side, the East drab buildings, still marked by Allied bomb scars, bore empty store windows, destitute and begging citizens, and an overarching veil of dissolution. Just 3.5 years later, following the fall of the Berlin Wall, I had the honor of representing President George H.W. Bush as his Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. I was tasked with designing and delivering economic and technical assistance to the citizens of countries freed from socialism, communism, spanning from the Baltic to the Black Sea. To this day, I keep a piece of the Berlin Wall in my office as a poignant reminder of the grim purpose to keep people in and keep freedom out. Now, three decades later, we rejoice in the triumph of capitalism and freedom over authoritarianism and the control of socialism. While my Democratic colleagues and I may not agree on everything, I certainly hope we can unite in recognizing that socialism stands in direct opposition to the values upon which America was founded. Time and time again, socialist policies have failed, resulting in unimaginable suffering for nations and millions of people across the globe. Despite socialism's long history of failure, we're met with insurgencies of people trying to institute that backwards framework. And a recent survey revealed a concerning trend. 62% of Americans aged 18 to 29 view socialism favorably. I worry that some of my Democratic colleagues have not learned from the lessons of the past. Many of their legislative proposals, although many well-intentioned, provide a path that leads us and our nation in a wrong direction, often towards a socialist failure. In their pursuit to tackle social issues, those on the far left have taken the approach that more closely mirrors communist China than proven free market solutions that make America the envy of the world. Again, this is not a critique of the integrity of any colleague or their intentions, which is why I believe it's a call to denounce socialism should be a resolution that we can all support in this House. During my time in the House, Republicans have consistently fought to safeguard our nation from the dangers of socialism. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle in upholding American ideals by supporting this resolution. As history has proven, the alternatives, like socialism, will lead to catastrophic consequences. Let's send a strong message to our citizens and adversaries that socialism has no place in the United States. I want to thank Congressman Salazar again for her commitment, work on this important resolution. I yield back the balance of my time and look forward to our questions.
Gentleman yields back. Ms. Waters' statement will be placed into the record when we receive it. I now recognize the gentlelady from Minnesota, Ms. Fishbach.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Representative Hill, for bringing it forward, and I thank Representative Salazar for introducing it. I think it really does speak for itself as you take a look at the resolution And you are absolutely right that socialism is against all of the principles that we're founded on. And so I think it's important that we state that. I'm a co-sponsor of the resolution. And you look at some of the things that happened in the election in New York, mayor of New York, and, there was, and someone running in Minneapolis who fortunately lost the position of mayor. But I think this is a critical time, and you mentioned also that young people's favorite, or see this resolution forward it's at a good time. And so again, I thank you, and I yield back.
And the lady yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Ranking Member Mr. McGovern, for his time of questioning.
Well, the gentleman knows I like him a lot, but I really can't believe that this is what we're spending our time debating in the Rules Committee right now. When every public opinion poll tells us that the issue of affordability is front and center. And this is what Chairman Hill, this resolution states that Congress, quote, denounces socialism in all its forms and opposes the implementation of socialist policies in the United States, end quote. So let's have a little lightning round here, since your bill doesn't have a definition of socialism in it. And I just want you to help me narrow it down a little bit, because quite frankly, because Republicans routinely say that everything Democrats do is socialism. And I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this. And I just have some yes or no questions that I hope to get you to just say if these things are socialist policies or not. So let's start. Socialist or not, Medicare.
I think it's I'll give you a yes or no answer. That is on the side of state control of health care, so I'd say it could be considered socialist.
Oh, wow, okay. Social Security.
No.
What about SNAP, the Food Assistance Program?
No.
How about VA Health or the VA Home Loan Program? Is that socialist?
I don't think so. I think that's a commitment we made following the admonition of President Lincoln to pay benefits to those who wore the uniform and served in uniform.
Fire departments?
No.
National parks?
No.
Public schools?
No.
How about the Affordable Care Act tax credits, which Republicans are refusing to extend?
Well, again, I think the state has far too much control in health care dominating it, and therefore I think the health care programs, as a general matter, could be considered state control and therefore on the side of socialism.
So, okay, so of all those, you kind of hint that the tax credits might be, and Medicare, you mentioned, might be considered a socialist program. So is this resolution condemning Medicare?
No, it's condemning socialism.
Yeah, according to the bill, it says Congress announces socialism in all its forms. And you just said that Medicare could be considered a socialist program.
Yes, some people could consider it a too much state control, that's right.
Okay. Let me ask you a few more. Socialist or not, President Trump's proposal to use tariff revenue from his trade war to bail out farmers to the tune of billions of dollars.
I don't think that's socialism.
That's redistributing kind of.
Well, I don't.
That's like well, whatever. I'm going to.
Yeah.
Yes. How about the Trump administration's $9 billion stake in chip manufacturer Intel?
I didn't support the CHIPS Act by the Biden administration. I'm not a big fan of industrial policy on that scale, personally.
So that's a yes for that?
Well, I wouldn't call it socialism. I'm not calling it socialism, but you're asking me,
Medicare is, but that's not. Okay. Commerce Secretary Lutnick recently stated that the Trump administration is considering taking ownership stakes in large defense companies like Boeing and Lockheed Martin. If he did that, would that be a socialist policy?
Not necessarily.
So, look, again, there's no definition in here, but you just basically said that Medicare could be considered a socialist policy. And as I read, this is it's resolved that Congress denounces socialism in all its forms and opposes the implementation of socialist policies in the United States. Again, we did this last year.
You did. Well, as Congress, and you voted in favor of it, I think.
Yeah.
You voted against it in the rule. I don't know how you voted on it. Let's see.
I think I voted no.
You voted no, yeah?
Yeah, no. Because there's no definition here. And I have to be honest with you, I'm really concerned, because I follow social media like everybody here does, listen to the news, and I hear the word socialist thrown around all the time for every program that seems to be about helping lift people out of poverty, that helps make people's quality of life better. And again, I think Medicare is a good program. I support it 1,000,000%. And so I cannot vote for a resolution that can be interpreted as condemning Medicare as a socialist policy. So I thank the gentleman for being here, but again, I wish we were doing something like extending the Affordable Care Act tax credits, or doing something to lower the cost of food for people. But this is what we're doing after 8 weeks of paid vacation. And again, I respect the gentleman, but I respectfully will not support this. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentleman of Georgia, Mr. Scott, for his time of questioning.
Certainly Medicare is a social insurance program, but I don't think I would disagree with them. I do not believe that it is a socialist program. There's still a lot of consumer choice in there, and people pay a premium, pay a tax all of their life to have access to it. I think what's so alarming to me, and my granddad told me if things kept going in the country many years ago, that we would end up with people who were socialists and communists actually running for office and getting elected in this country. And I guess I kind of didn't think that ever happened here, but it is happening in this country. And I do think that it is important that we bring awareness to what socialism actually is and the dangers of it. And so I intend to support the resolution, and I don't have any questions, Mr. Hill, unless you have something that you would like to add.
No. Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentlelady of Pennsylvania, Ms. Scanlon, for her time of questioning.
Thanks. I would yield first to the ranking member.
So it would seem to me that it would have maybe been smart to put a definition in this bill of what you're talking about, because you guys can't even agree on what socialism is and which programs are socialist. And again, the word gets thrown around an awful lot. I don't like it when it gets thrown around. When you're putting Medicare in the same pile as when you're talking about Fidel Castro. I mean, I just don't think it's. I think this is an important and vital social program. But the bottom line is, increasingly in our political system, the word is being thrown around to describe politicians. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you think we're all socialists up here. I don't know what you think. But the bottom line is that the word gets thrown around very casually. And if you're going to have a resolution, condemning it, I would think that it would maybe be in everybody's interest to have a detailed definition of what you're talking about. And so I thank the gentlelady for yielding. I yield my time back to her.
Thanks. I do think that is a fatal flaw in this legislation, is there's no definition of socialism. And when it is increasingly being used as some kind of scarlet A to brand anyone or anything that you don't like, I know that every member on this side of the dais has been called a socialist by our Republican opponents, often on the same day that we're called a corporate tool. So, pardon me if I don't find the lack of definition of any help. In the absence of a definition, we do see increasingly that everything that those on the right dislike is called socialist. And I find it small wonder that particularly young people are more open to considering the possibility of some socialist proposals when they hear everyone being labeled a socialist, and the economy is sure as hell not working for them. They can't afford a house, they can't afford a car, they can't afford their student loans, and our government, our Congress is not doing anything to help them out other than throwing around, frankly, stupid resolutions denouncing the horrors of socialism without even saying what that is. So I would be more than happy to endorse a bill that celebrates our democratic republic, the separation of powers, that denounces authoritarianism, but this is just another bullshit bill, and I can't support it. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Norman, for his time of questioning.
You know, this describes the difference now that the two parties have, Chairman Hill. This describes what those comments were, describes what we're up against. And I agree with the Supreme Court who, on the pornography issue, they said they know it when they see it. There's no definition. But if their party, which is pretty frightening, is endorsing a man in New York City that is advocating for total government control of gas stations, of our supermarkets, dismantling the police. That's the difference now that we're facing in this country. That's the part that my good friend, Mr. McGovern, he's parsing the things, programs that,
I just support
that
Medicare.
began years ago and got off track. Social Security should not be rated. Medicare should have guardrails. They want no guardrails. They want total government control. That's the difference in the Democrat Party now. Marxist socialist, assuming office, funded by a man by the name of George Soros, who does not have the best interests of this country. It's pretty clear, it's interesting, it shocked me, his comments. But that's where we are today in this country. That's where their party is. That's why Americans are not going to endorse
I think, Mr. Norman, if I could, I think the capitalist system offers individual ownership, freedom of choice. I think those are important issues. And that when somebody proposes to have state control of all the gas stations or all the grocery stores in New York, I view that as a taking, which is anti-private property, anti-choice, anti-freedom of association and business, and that's not the right direction for our country. And that's how frequently you've seen socialist tendencies begin to get a bigger and bigger part of the economy and eventually take over the country in full state control, as we saw in Eastern Europe, and I witnessed firsthand when I was there working after the Berlin Wall fell, and I don't think that's in the interest of the United States, and I think it's absolutely something that's shared by both political parties in the United States, the majority of both political parties in the United States, that our market-based system here and our capitalist system has done more to lift people out of poverty here and around the world than any other system ever devised by man. And as we celebrate the 250th birthday of our country, we ought to be celebrating that and rejecting state control and state dominance of every aspect of our lives.
Would you not agree that socialism is a godless type, call it non-religion? Do they embrace a God as our Constitution does?
Well, I think you'd have to be looking at the people who've used socialism to control the state and make that a decision, not so much about the definition that we might come up with on socialism, but how people have implemented it in their country and in the 20th century experience that we've seen, whether it's in Cuba or in Eastern Europe, it was a godless religion. I mean, religion was condemned by Marx, by Lenin, by communism, and that doctrine is what governed so many socialists and communists in the 20th century.
Well, it shows you the kind of war we're in with with their party, with their thought process. And regardless of what they say, socialism is a godless type of abuse of the thing that made this country great, which is freedom, faith, family, and freedom. Appreciate it. I support this. Yield back.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. I'm now going to recognize Ms. Ledger Fernandez of New Mexico. We have worked it out so we can get the parliamentary procedure right, that she is then going to yield some time to Ms. Waters, who's here, so that she can make her opening statement. And I appreciate that. Thank you.
That is exactly what I'm going to do. Welcome, Ranking Member Waters, and we would love to hear your opening statement.
You're still not on. I had the darndest time with those mics.
There it is. Congressman Griffith and Ranking Member McGovern and members of the committee, once again, we're not here to debate solutions that lower costs for Americans, tackle the affordable housing crisis, support small businesses, or build a thriving financial system that works for everyone. Instead, Republicans are advancing a resolution that undermines critical programs like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and Obamacare by simply suggesting that these policies that support hardworking Americans leads to despotic, totalitarian government. And so, let me just ask, the government shutdown demonstrated how important food assistance programs, how important they are to 42 million people in America. But this resolution would cast such assistance as so-called socialism. It's crystal clear how President Trump views the Americans who rely so very much on food assistance after possibly breaking the law to pay masked federal agents as they arrest U.S. citizens. The administration fought twice in the Supreme Court to avoid having to use legally available funds that would let hungry Americans eat. Instead of working to end the shutdown, the Trump administration fired an entire office, the Community Development of Financial Institutions Fund, a critical agency that works with small lenders to offer affordable loans and assistance in rural and struggling communities. Trump's action was so outrageous that more than 220 lawmakers in Congress, including 102 Republicans, rebuked the president. I'm appalled that after witnessing Americans struggling during their 2-month paid vacation, they're gutting even more programs that Americans depend on instead of taking action to lower the cost of living. And it couldn't come at a worse time. This past October saw the highest level of job cuts since 2003. Up to 22 million Americans will see their monthly health insurance premiums double, and up to 5 million Americans may become uninsured because Republicans refuse to extend the Obamacare tax cuts and tax credits. And as more than 4 million young people experience homelessness, the Trump administration is cutting funding that could put 170,000 people back on the street. Instead of addressing these issues, House Republicans are trying to scare the American people about so-called socialism. Now, everyone here agrees that we should denounce brutal dictators like Stalin or Pol Pot, but the sponsor seems to have forgotten history's most terrible dictators like Adolf Hitler. And why aren't we denouncing modern-day dictators like Putin, who has for the last 3 years terrorized Ukraine and his own people? Why aren't we denouncing President Xi of China, who runs concentration camps for ethnic minorities? Because maybe it's because Republicans know that President Trump admires both Putin and Xi. Or if my Republican colleagues are so concerned about socialism in the U.S., why not denounce the actions we've seen in the last year that follow those dictators' playbook? President Trump has targeted the free press, targeted universities, our fair legal system, forced the Justice Department to prosecute his political opponents, sent mass federal agents and military into U.S. cities, such as mine, arrested and detained Americans, including children. He's also demanded the government be given ownership interest in American companies like Intel. If that's not socialist, I don't know what it is. And he has undermined the role of this body, blocking funding that Congress passed into law. And like other modern-day dictators, the Trump family is finding countless ways to personally benefit, using their own stablecoin and other cryptocurrencies, even as Congress considers legislation and regulators writes the rules. In fact, the Trump family is more than $1 billion richer from crypto alone since taking office. And while Americans struggle to put food on the table, Trump is building a golden ballroom in the White House, spending $40 billion to Argentina, sending it and hosting Great Gatsby-themed parties at Mar-a-Lago. Okay, all right. And so none of this, anything in this resolution, does nothing to lower costs in America. So I urge my colleagues to remove this resolution and instead simply ask a no vote and allow amendments instead of passing a closed rule. I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Waters. And I'll ask the question, Mr. Hill. This resolution, the Ranking Member asked, how come it doesn't condemn Adolf Hitler? How come it doesn't condemn Putin? How come it doesn't condemn Xi? Is there a reason why you left those out? I don't see any reason why. If you're going to be condemning sort of brutal dictators and authoritarianism, why didn't you condemn them?
Well, first, I think Ms. Salazar, in her resolution, let's not forget the conditions that brought her to America, which is a Cuban exile. And so she centers her life experience about Castro's communism, which is a creature of Russia's Soviet communism. And that's at the heart of why she drafted this resolution, because she is a victim, her family's a victim herself of Castro's takeover of that country. And she talks about the death of Ukrainians at the hands of the Soviets in here. So I think she more than satisfactorily addresses some of the examples that are important to her that are the most egregious, some of the most egregious cases, but not exclusively, of the negative impacts of socialism.
So even though Putin is a dictator in Russia right now, he's left out. But what's more concerning is the idea that there is no definition at all, right, of what socialist is. And we've heard on this panel today, people condemn our mayor-elect of New York City, or the mayor-elect of New York City, who ran on an issue of affordability. The idea that we would be condemning somebody who ran on an issue of affordability, of making sure that rents are affordable, that buses work and run on time, that grocery costs are now outrageous. That is the problem. We have had everything from Medicare being a form of socialism to a democratically elected mayor, overwhelmingly democratic elected mayor, being condemned as socialist. And would those fall under that? Because there's no definition. And I think my colleague hit it right. Representative Scanlon pointed out that the frustration that Americans are feeling right now is that the rich are getting richer. And right now we know that 0.1% of households in the United States reached $23.3 trillion last year, while the bottom 50% barely hold 4.2. So what we have right now is a country where the haves keep getting more and where this Congress does not do anything to address that structural imbalance. And when they do, like with the Affordable Care Act, with Medicare, with addressing those issues, it can get condemned as socialist and equivalent to Joseph Stalin and Mao Zedong and Fidel Castro and Pol Pot and these other people, when those policies are just trying to help Americans survive and pay their bills and have health care, which, as we heard on the floor last week, when Leader Jeffries cited Martin Luther King that access to health care is the most important right ever? And we have people tonight condemning Medicare, which provides health care to our elderly and those who are disabled, as socialist in favor of condemnation? I agree with my colleagues here. This is not what we should be doing. We should be addressing that affordability crisis. Thank you very much.
Would the gentlewoman yield?
Of course.
Does the gentleman think that rent control produces more housing at lower prices for the citizens in New York? Do you
Well, you
think
know
that
what,
state control of grocery stores produces more food at lower prices?
Well, that is an issue that the great thing about democracy is that the people of New York City could decide on that, and they have decided that they want to elect somebody who is going to look at addressing these issues, because what is clear is that the system we have now is not working for Americans, that the system we have now is not making rent affordable, and it's not making home ownership available. So the system we have now, where we keep passing policies and passing tax cuts that give trillions to billionaires like you voted for last July, is not working for working Americans. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. I now recognize myself for my time of questioning. And I don't have many questions. I will just say a few things. One, there is a difference between a government that is socialistic and a government that has a welfare state mentality. That is the distinction with a lot of our European countries that have successfully had democratic programs initiated by their countries that are welfare programs, but not true socialism. Now, it's also true that socialism, since its inception, has been hard to define. And the various types of socialism and socialists disagree with one another as to who is or what is the true socialism. I think what the resolution is trying to get at, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to ask you if you agree with me, is that what we have seen is that socialism has existed now for a couple centuries. And whenever socialism becomes the predominant philosophy of a governmental state, freedom suffers and is greatly curtailed. Would you agree with that?
I do agree with that.
And that's what this resolution is trying to condemn, is it not?
It is. I mean, I think we learned that time and time again in the lessons of the 20th century. The famous Austrian economist Hayek said that time and time again, people argued, gosh, there's just not enough government in this particular sector of the economy. If we had 100% government control, we promise you we'll get a better outcome. And so, to me, programs that lead to greater state control limit freedom, they limit choice, they raise prices, they limit supply, and they're not in the best interest, which is why I think all of us as Americans should band together this week and condemn socialism.
Thank you, gentlemen. I yield back. That concludes panel 3, and we appreciate our witnesses for being here. Thank you. We will take a brief recess so that folks can leave and we can get set up for panel 4. All right, I will now call us back into session, and I welcome our 4th panel, the distinguished former chairman of this committee, Representative Pete Sessions, and Representative Lee from the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. Your full statement will be submitted for the record, and we ask that you summarize your statement in 5 minutes. Representative Sessions, I welcome your testimony. You may begin.
Chairman, thank you very much, and what a delight it is to be up in front of the committee before. I have many friends who I've spent years with Is that better? Years with, not only in service to this great nation, but also this Congress, and I appreciate everybody doing the same this term also. Mr. Chairman, you've read my statement, and I'm going to go ahead and summarize it if I can, but the young chairman of the Government Reform and Oversight Committee, Jamie Comer, has asked that I be here today to present two bills to the committee. There are two bills which were debated before the government shut down. They represent strong work that I believe represents common sense and a lot of things that will streamline the need to make sure that Washington, D.C. effectively corrects itself by looking at some of the issues that we believe have been taken advantage of, not just the citizens, but in this case, many children and adults and senior citizens and those who may be in disability form. And so I would like to, if I can, refer first to a bill by, it's H.R. 5214, and it's called the District of Columbia Cash Bail Reform Act. Representative Elise Stefanik, one of our young members from New York, wrote this bill, and I think it represents the essence of what we need, and that is that bail would be looked at and reformed. The need to have bail, who would qualify for bail, and under what circumstances. And I must say that you could easily say that the District of Columbia, unless you were caught red-handed committing a murder or an extreme felony, you did not have to post bail. They had provisions where they did not. They just brought you in, processed you, and let you go. And we believe that that has presented itself with people who have taken advantage of this system and have done things that we believe are wrong. The more to this is that a bail system is there to protect people from someone who is out of control, someone who has created a crime, committed a crime, and it allows the community to be safer. So I think that what she has done is she has come up and looked at the bail system and made changes. We debated this specifically for certain cases of aggravated assault and other things, other matters that were very egregious crimes against people, and we believe we're doing the right thing. Second is a bill, H.R. 5107, Common Sense Law Enforcement Accountability, now in D.C. Act called the CLEAN Act. And essentially, this is a bill that would provide a more level playing field to the police officers in Washington, D.C., and there are a number of specific things that this bill is intended to correct. Number one, we believe that when there is a police officer who's involved, perhaps in some question, that the union could be of representation to them. We think that that's important, that a police officer not have to just go get outside counsel that's very expensive to protect himself, but rather the union could be there. Secondly, there's a specific provisions that would be given about body cam. Body cameras, police officer, when they're going back and filing their report, are not allowed to look at that today. And we think that that is wrong. Things that happen in the heat of the moment are captured, and we believe as they're redoing their report, that would be one of the things they'd be allowed to do. And perhaps another is that we believe that they would be able to have greater help as they represent the people of the District of Columbia. And so these matters come directly to Representative Clyde's bill for accountability. Accountability is with our police officers. They stand out today as shielding citizens from criminals, people who are dangerous, people who are having a bad day, people who do things wrong. And we need to make sure that this Accountability Act is fair also for the men and women of law enforcement. Mr. Chairman, I'll be pleased to make myself up in any questions you may have.
I thank the gentleman and now recognize Representative Lee for her time to present her 5-minute summary of her opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm, of course, grateful to be here, but disappointed. And the reason it's completely unbelievable that we're here today yet again to micromanage Washington, D.C. The federal government was shut down for 42 days, a record-breaking 42 days. The Republicans who control the House, the Senate, and the presidency put Americans' health and safety at risk, even making multiple attempts to block the most vulnerable Americans from accessing benefits that keep them from starving. Republicans have shown a lack of ability to govern the federal government, yet they want to take on local issues. Millions of Americans are seeing huge spikes in health insurance, costs up to 114%. Your monthly premiums could more than double, and Republicans refuse to act. Multiple federal courts ruled that the president must allow SNAP funds to be distributed, yet the president ignored the courts and refused to comply with the law. And still, my Republican colleagues insist that micromanaging D.C. is the best use of our time. Today, the Rules Committee will consider 2 pieces of legislation that are a ridiculous overreach by our federal government. D.C. has over 700,000 residents. That's more than 2 states. D.C. taxpayers don't just pay federal taxes, they pay more per capita than any state. D.C. as a whole contributes more total federal taxes than 26 states. The people handling D.C.'s government should be local leaders who are accountable to the people of D.C. and who actually know the city, not some member of Congress who has never left Capitol Hill or Navy Yard. If Donald Trump wants to run D.C., he should resign from the presidency and run for mayor. And my Republican colleagues are welcome to run for D.C. Council. We all support public safety, but the federal government should be a partner to D.C., and we should focus on actual solutions instead of attempts at being an overseer. Despite the Trump administration's repeated claims that violent crime in D.C. is rising, the Republican investigation into crime statistics at the Metropolitan Police Department has confirmed what we already know. Crime has gone down. The committee's investigation has also repeatedly highlighted the steps D.C. government officials have taken to bring down crime from its recent peak in 2023. The D.C. Council passed legislation to fill gaps in the criminal code, to fix unintentional problems created by existing laws, and to empower local courts. We've also repeatedly heard about the importance of maintaining that critical partnership between local enforcement, local elected officials, and the communities they serve. It is the responsibility of D.C.'s elected officials to address local D.C. issues, not Congress. Today, the majority is proposing 2 bills which will both attack D.C.'s right at self-government. First, we have H.R. 5214, the District of Columbia Cash Bail Reform Act. Under this bill, if you're charged with certain crimes, you will automatically be locked up before your trial. For other crimes, the bill will require cash bail or a bond. This will make D.C.'s local law far stricter than the federal law. Pretrial release should be based on a judge's determination of flight risk or danger to the community, not just a blanket mandate from Congress. When a person's freedom is at stake, they deserve to be heard as an individual rather than painted with a broad brush. You shouldn't automatically be locked up based on a criminal charge before you're proven guilty. It seems Republicans have forgotten about innocent until proven guilty and the Fifth Amendment, core tenets of our democracy. And our system should not treat you more harshly just because you're poor or a resident of the District of Columbia. Rich defendants are not less prone to criminality than poor defendants. This bill will lock up more poor people and more innocent people. It's unfair to D.C. and unfair to innocent people. Next, and finally, we have the Clean D.C. Act, which repeals common sense criminal justice reforms passed by D.C.'s elected representatives in the wake of the Black Lives Matter protests. We know that cities and communities all over the country passed similar reforms to increase trust, accountability, and safety. In D.C., these measures increase accountability for bad actors. They improve training for police officers. They strengthened independent civilian oversight and expanded public access to body-worn cameras. None of these reforms are radical or anti-police measures. None of them are particularly transformative. They are the first small steps towards justice, and this bill repeals all of that. It would damage what little trust there is between D.C. police and the communities they protect and serve. We should oppose it. Both of these bills are opposed by D.C. residents. They are opposed by the mayor and the council. They were opposed by D.C.'s member of Congress in the Oversight Committee. We should reject them. I urge the majority to keep their hands off DC, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. I will delay my questioning till a little later. Congresswoman Fishbach, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I want to say, Congressman Sessions, thank you for bringing this forward, and thank you for being here, because there's obvious real concern about the crime in the DC area. And, you know, we have to be here. And so we understand what is happening there. We have a constitutional obligation to oversee what is going on. You know, the cashless bail is really a problem, because the police officers, you know, risk their lives to arrest and make sure that they're put in, that criminals are put in jail, and then they're let right out, and they have to do it over and over and over again. And so it's dangerous. And I think you probably explained it, but, you know, how would that bill really, really keep those folks, keep folks in jail?
Congresswoman, thank you very much. And what a delight it is to be before you and your young chairman, the great Virginia Fox. The inference that Republicans or any member of Congress simply lives on Capitol Hill or visits the Navy Yard is, I don't think, the correct way to look at this. My parents lived here since 1987. My father, former director of the FBI for President Reagan, President Bush, and President Clinton. During that period of time and the 30 years, 25 years after, both my parents sought the opportunity to walk at night and to be involved in their neighborhood and to move places freely in Washington, D.C. And I would say generally that was very well accommodated. But not everybody lives in Northwest. Members of Congress have had their cars carjacked with a gun at their head. One of my staff members, when he was in high school, had a knife put at his throat and his car stolen. That person never even got behind a bar, never slowed down, was simply brought in and scolded. They were arrested, and that was it. It is important to note that bail is a part of a process whereby someone has to stand before a judge and make an account for what they have done. You could say a lot of things about kids that have to do this, but it slows them down. It provides some bit of deterrence against their activity. For someone who is just homeless and on the street, probably not so much. But for people who are out committing crimes, increasingly we find in the District of Columbia, they are youth. They are 14, 15, 16 years old, and they have guns, and they kill their own people also, meaning their own ethnicity. And this is a crime problem, and we have held a number of hearings in the committee for a number of years where people believe that they're asking for bail to slow down because it keeps someone in jail, and then you've got to have someone through a legal process come and represent them to get them out, and then there's accountability. We aren't talking about the outcome of juries. We're talking about the outcome of slowing down people who are committing crimes and will turn around and do it again. So I think that this makes perfect sense when you've got an opportunity for a judge to be able to use the standards of the law, to be able to apply it as opposed to being told, leave it alone, let them go. It's a big difference. And I think members of Congress who live here, who work here, should have a say in the matter. Lastly, let me say this, that someone wants to argue that it's none of our business. First of all, we did this before the government shut down. The hearing was held several months ago. And in that hearing, we had no clue that we would be shutting down the government, so we had been busy. Secondly, I voted to fund the government. I voted to make sure that it stayed open. Under Home Rule Act, Congress has the right to enact legislation for D.C. on any subject, including legislation to amend or repeal any law enforced in Washington, D.C. So if someone wants to know whether it's our jurisdiction or not, it is in law.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I just, and I expressed my concern earlier, but I will reiterate it because I think that, as we talk about police officers and the hard job that they do and making sure that what they are out there protecting us, apprehending criminals, and making sure that when they do bring them in, it is dealt with appropriately and they are not just sent back out immediately, because these officers do put their life on the line every single day for us. And to disrespect them that way by turning around and letting people out the back door as soon as they bring them in is an issue. So I thank you for bringing the bills forward, and I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Fischbach. Ms. Scanlon, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I feel like there's a gross misrepresentation here about what's happening with respect to the criminal justice system in D.C., starting with the idea that if someone is arrested, they're immediately tossed back out on the street and that there is no bail process. My understanding is that the cash bail system that's in effect has been in effect since the the first George Bush administration, so 30, 40 years of this process, but it requires judges, when someone is arrested, to assess the likelihood that they'll show up for their trial, at which point criminal charges could be proven or disproven, and also that their danger to the community is assessed. Is that right?
Yes, it is. And Representative Scanlon, if you would allow me a moment to disabuse the committee of a couple, I think, dangerous assertions that we've heard. I do want to say that under our Constitution, an arrest does not equal criminality. One who is arrested is not automatically a criminal. In fact, it runs afoul our due process and a presumption of innocence that all folks accused of crime are owed. So even the assertion that to implement a cash bail on overwhelmingly poor and marginalized folks who are accused of crime to slow down the process is actually an improper use of our criminal legal system. It is not, the purpose is not to slow down someone who has already committed crime, because it's assuming that they've already committed a crime. Instead, the purpose of going to trial and a trial by jury is to determine and discern whether or not a person has committed a crime. A person who is held without cash bail has not necessarily had a hearing yet. There has been no trial, which is, of course, one of the problems. The assertion or the implication being that if one is poor, they're more likely to be a flight risk or a danger to their community. But if a person is rich or of means and commits a crime, that they are somehow less dangerous. That's what this particular bill got at. The idea that someone's socioeconomic status does not equate to their criminality or their flight risk.
How many people did you say reside in the District of Columbia?
I believe it's around 700,000.
Okay, so 700,000 people, and while I understand that our home rule legislation gives Congress the authority to overturn laws duly enacted at the behest of the democratically elected people in the District of Columbia, it seems to me something that would have to be exercised with great care to have 535 people who do not live in the District of Columbia, but visit it occasionally, some years less occasionally than others, to have them impose their will on the 700,000 people that actually do live here and have, through their elections of their representatives, expressed opinions on how they would like the district run. I find that just really, really troubling, and I'm always struck by how our colleagues from North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas, other jurisdictions would feel if suddenly 500 people from the District of Columbia popped into their districts and told them how they should run their jurisdictions. I think it's, it may be a legal authority, but I think it's one that has to be exercised extremely cautiously, and this is not a place to do it. So is there anything else you would like to add?
No, I think, I think this idea that we have to exert some sort of control over the District of Columbia and its residents, I think is an incredibly paternalistic viewpoint. I think even when we consider where or why the residents of D.C. are allowed to govern themselves, it comes from the D.C. Home Rule Charter that was signed into law by Richard Nixon. Right, for a reason, right? These are tax-paying residents of our country. They are no less capable of governing themselves, of understanding the local particularities or the local needs, the unique needs of their district than any other people's districts. That they are also folks who are taxed with no representation, I think should also be on the record, that we are talking about a group of people who, again, pay more taxes federally than 26 other states, and yet have no representation. They have no Senate representation, and they have no House representation. And now this committee wants to strip their local government of its ability to enact or carry out laws that harm or help or benefit the people of their own constituents.
I would have to agree with all that. I think our time would probably be better spent discussing whether or not the District of Columbia should have statehood and therefore be entitled to proportionate representation as well as senators, given the size of the community. So thank you for your testimony. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Scanlon. Mr. Scott, you're recognized.
Madam Chair, I was just reading through this, and Mr. Sessions, I see violence or dangerous crime, robbery in the first degree, attempted robbery in the first degree, robbery with a dangerous weapon. I mean, we have a duty to protect the citizens of this country. I mean, we're talking about violent crimes here, and to me, the victims got rights too. Am I missing something? I mean,
Mr. Scott,
seems to me like a good piece of.
Yes, sir. Mr. Scott, I think that you have focused on what we believe the essence of the bill is, and that is not on your socioeconomic outcome, how rich or how poor you are, what colored your skin might be, what your ethnicity might be. It is related to an offense that is dangerous and that is harmful to the community and that is against the law in other places. And simply to argue that this group of people here should allow this to happen is very interesting. 2 years ago, as DC was talking about another crime bill, a female member of Congress who was a Democrat was assaulted, and it automatically changed the vote that took place in the United States Senate, because the reality of what is happening is apparent to everyone. Just like I stated about one of my staffers who had a knife placed on his throat and threatened, the young man was brought in. He was arrested and immediately let go. That was the third or fourth occurrence where he had put a knife to someone's throat. I would like to really see the kind of judge that thought that that was not of something of a nature that they did not need to be incarcerated for or held accountable with bail for. And so we just have different standards. But at no point have we talked about anything other than crime and safety and protecting lives. And that is what I believe is a responsibility. I believe the Home Rule Act allows us that. And so I'm very proud and pleased to bring both these bills today.
I don't have any further questions. Madam Chair, I yield.
Thank you very much. Mr. Griffith, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. D.C. is a special creature in our Constitution. It's created in the Constitution to be no more than 10 square miles. It's not the same as every other city in the country. Its setup is different. I have actually had a bill in for some time that would cede the territory that is currently the District of Columbia. You know, District of Columbia used to be bigger, and part of it was retrocessed, is the word, back to the Commonwealth of Virginia. I have a retrocession bill for Maryland to take over D.C., and then Maryland can do whatever it wants to with its charter to DC if we were to do that, with the exception of a few blocks where the seat of government is located. Because the Constitution says it can be no more than 10 square miles. It doesn't say it can't be less. But those issues came up. I would note, however, that sometimes people say things, and as a recovering attorney, and it is an affliction in one's life at times because you hear things differently than other folks, I just remind people that coming from the Commonwealth of Virginia, every city has a charter. That city charter is different for each locality. And further, the legislature, 100 members of the House and 40 members of the Senate, can revoke that charter and take over the city should they so choose, or revert it back to the county from which it originally came. There have been some reversions on cities that felt like they had lost population and wanted to go back to their county. But this is a tool available to the states, or at least to the Commonwealth of Virginia under its Constitution and its charters to the cities. And I would remind everybody that Virginia is a Dillon Rule state, meaning that the cities do not have any power not specifically granted to them by the state legislature. So when comments are made that, you know, how would you like it if 435 people came in and took over? Well, I mean, in theory, it hasn't happened, but Virginia could do that to any city in the Commonwealth, including cities that used to be a part of the District of Columbia, like Alexandria. That said, I also point out, and Mr. Chairman, I would ask you this. I was very confused when first looking at this because it keeps talking about cash bonds. And that concerned me because as a recovering defense attorney in the criminal arena, many of my clients did not have sufficient funds to post a cash bond, but could post a property bond. But in researching it and looking at it, it does appear in those areas where this bill says cash, it really means a surety bond. And when you follow the definitions in the bill, that does include posting a property bond. And that's important because a lot of times you'll have family members who are willing, because they're going to keep you on the right path. You've had a bad night. I think you said that, Mr. Chairman. Or I keep thinking of you as Rules Chairman. I apologize, Mr. Sessions. But Representative Sessions, you said sometimes you have a bad night and you do things you ought not do, and we want to make sure we protect society. I agree with that. Sometimes you just got evil people, but sometimes somebody has a bad night and they really do something bad. And if the family is willing to step in and say, yes, we will make sure that this young man or this young woman behaves themselves, they can post a property bond. That is still preserved in here as I read it. Is that not correct?
That would be correct, sir. And as a part of the court, you recognize that one of the most important things that in criminal matters, when you have a DWI, most places require that you spend the night. And that is because people do not remember what they did.
Well, in fact, in Virginia, there's
the same would be true of drugs, that you have people that are wildly out of control. And this is a control mechanism, and as I said, to slow them down a bit. And I think that's important, an important point that would be available within this
And just because we're talking legal theory, Virginia actually has on a DWI a 7-day administrative revocation of one's driver's license. So there are penalties just when you're charged. And then, of course, there are famous cases where people can't get bond because of their flight risk, even if they're wealthy. We had one recently with a rapper, spent a lot of time, if I remember correctly, spent a lot of time in jail pre-trial because there was concern about leaving to go to other countries. And that's since been resolved, but that was the nature of that beast. So there's never a perfect situation that will fit every single situation perfectly, but we've seen that what we have now in D.C. does not work. Would you agree with that?
I would, sir, and that is why we're trying to hold the hearings that we have in government oversight, government reform and oversight. We've attempted to bring people in. We had the mayor in. We had a number of people, and I talked specifically to them at that time in a common sense way and told them, we are attempting to bring some bit of balance, and that's what I believe this represents. The main part of what I was speaking about that day is judges. They have, I don't recall exactly, but some 14 judges that they have been unable to appoint, and it falls on some 3 judges. And their selection of judges up to the time we got in, and even now, is a failure. We're trying to fix some frailties, and we believe this are frailties, and I believe it's the right thing. And I'm delighted that this Rules Committee is able to, as part of the process, to hear these same facts and factors.
And I would submit to the gentleman as well that while we talk about, not allowing bond in some cases, the vast majority of crimes, even the vast majority of the ones included specifically in this bill, there is still there's a presumption that bail is not appropriate, but then that is a rebuttable presumption. Is that not correct?
Well, it would be, and that's why we specifically refer to those that are the most dangerous.
Right.
As it were to rise up on the offense that would be presented.
I appreciate the gentleman's comments. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Griffith. And I may come back to some of the issues you raised in a moment. Mr. Norman. Sorry, Ms. Ledger-Fernandez, you sneaked in when I wasn't looking. Thank you. You're recognized.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. In the time before Trump's era of scandal and corruption, a woman like Megyn Kelly suggesting it's not that bad to molest and rape girls if they are 15 and not 5 would have had her show canceled. But because she debased herself in service to Trump's pedophile protection efforts, she's still on the air. In the time before Trump's era of cruelty and hunger, the denial of food benefits that Congress appropriated for the hungry would be investigated by your committee, the Oversight Committee. It'd be condemned by every religious group. Instead, the Catholic bishops are attacked for raising the scriptures that teach about caring for your neighbor, and the Republicans' Oversight Committee remains silent in the face of that overreach and cruelty. In the time before Trump's era of scandal and corruption, having Trump appear 1,500 times in just Epstein's emails, including in reference to the rape of a young girl, would lead to the House and Senate hearings of the president and condemnation from every Republican elected official. Republicans forced Nixon to resign over much less. But that was back when Republicans' values and principles allowed them to challenge their president. Epstein had a network of the elite, of the rich and powerful that profited from abusing girls, sex trafficking, and pedophilia. The Oversight Committee should be focused on that. They should be focused on that instead of prioritizing bills that micromanage the local governing of D.C. And you know what? Republicans, some Republicans in this House, and hopefully we will have a big vote tomorrow, because our voters, Republican voters and Democratic voters, are outraged. And in this Rules Committee, we voted 9 times to delay the hearing and the vote on the Epstein Transparency Act. We could have been voting on this a long time ago. Adelita Grijalva could have been sworn in as Congresswoman a long time ago. Those are the things the oversight should be bringing to this committee. And with much sadness about what we will be hearing tomorrow as we sit and listen, hopefully many of us, with as open heart as we can have, to the Epstein survivors. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Ledger-Fernandez. Now, Mr. Norman, you're recognized.
I guess what, in response to Ms. Ledger Fernandez, you know, we are having to vote on it tomorrow. I wonder where the questions that you raised were the 4 years under your president, Joe Biden. Where was the interest to the victims, represent the victims? Crickets. James Comer's done a great job of putting this at his oversight hearing.
Would the
But back
gentleman
on
yield?
this-
Did you
back
want
on
an
this
answer
bill,
to that question?
Mr. Sessions.
Would the gentleman yield?
No, I really don't. I don't want to
I
be,
think there are answers.
do not want to yield. The bill that's before us is, makes common sense. We've got the right to do it. I wish everybody could have heard the testimony of what I heard Saturday of the girl who got murdered in Columbia, South Carolina, by a felon who had had 25 prior, he'd been arrested over 40 times, cut loose, liberal judges. We're going to redo the way we pick our judges in South Carolina. Virginia's the only other state that picks them like South Carolina does. But, you know, this isn't some small matter of a shoplifter who, you know, does not deserve, you know, a sentence. This is violent crime. In D.C., it's 664 per thousand, per 100,000. New York City, it wasn't but 189. So it's gotten out of hand up here. And I wonder if it were those who are questioning this, if it were their daughter, if it were their husband, if it were their work, if they got this type of you know, they're handcuffing the handcuffing the police officers and giving every right known to man to the criminals. They're sending the message: continue to do the crime. You're not going to do the time. It's over with. And Ms. Sessions, doesn't D.C. get a good bit of funding from the federal government? Could they do without the funding, you think?
Mr. Norman, the amount of carnage that happens in Washington, D.C. with things that I personally disagree with are staggering, including that Washington, D.C. a few years ago, all the money that was given for hospitals was used up in months just on overdoses alone. The amount of money that goes for women to have healthy babies, and they lead the nation in unhealthy babies. They have crime-ridden problems that get in the way of families that are trying to raise their children and have better schools. They will defund charter schools. They will take away the opportunity where a glimpse of light just appears. And I believe that we have been very careful at government reform and oversight. I chair what's called government operations, and I have tried to be very careful as we dealt with what the money, the federal money that was used, and what outcomes come there. But I think James Comer and the committee have attempted to look at the biggest problems, not all the problems. And we certainly are not there to do anything other than to make things a little bit better. And I think exactly the way you say it is the way it is, and that is we do have a responsibility, and we are going to exercise that. And it's not going to happen on our watch that we will allow this to continue.
No, and I mentioned earlier when Mr. McGovern made a comment about basically embracing socialism, a godless type of government. That's the difference now, what we're facing now. What New York City has embraced and what America was built on is not socialism. It's never worked. This is another example. This shows the difference in the two parties right now. One is completely off the rails, totally a Marxist-type government. This illustrates when it comes to crime, they coddle the criminal and do harm to the police. So thank you for bringing this up. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize myself. And first I want to say I appreciate so much the former chair of the Rules Committee for being here today and for being such a great friend over the years to me. I truly adore him and his family, and appreciate all of the,
Madam
all
Chairman,
that I've learned.
we named my first granddaughter Virginia for a reason.
You're very kind, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. I'm only going to point out a couple of little things, and my friend from Virginia walked into this earlier, and I'm grateful to him for all the points that he brought up. And I just do want to quote the Constitution, because I love quoting the Constitution, which is what we swear to uphold when we come into this body. This is Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. And it says to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district not exceeding 10 miles square as may, by secession of particular states and the acceptance of Congress, become the seat of the government of the United States. For those who want to say that we are overstepping our bounds, I want to say you obviously haven't read the Constitution, especially anybody who's taken an oath to uphold it, because that's what it says. We have exclusive rights to pass legislation to govern the District of Columbia. And that probably needs to be stated more often than it is stated. We are not impinging on the rights of any other elected body. The Constitution is the law of the land, and it takes precedent over every other legislation. We're not mistreating anyone within the bounds of what's left of the 10 miles, which was begun, as my colleague pointed out. No, we're doing our jobs. And I make no apologies for that whatsoever. Even if we did not have people being harmed, our own staffs, our own members being harmed, even if we didn't have those things happening, this is our not only right, but responsibility to do. And anybody who wants to run away from that responsibility is not upholding his or her oath. And so I think we're doing absolutely the right thing here. I think we ought to probably be doing a lot more. And I would not mind looking at the whole home rule issue and giving back to Congress the complete jurisdiction of what's happening in the District of Columbia, because it's not working out very well. So I thank you, and I want to echo what other members have said about the great job that the Oversight Committee has been doing in this regard and in other ways, and looking forward to this bill being on the floor and seeing how our colleagues respond to voting for this legislation, which I think is doing the right thing. I think there's no one else here to ask questions of our distinguished panel. And so I would say to you, thank you all very much for being here, and you're dismissed. Thank you. Mr. Moylan, I believe you have an amendment you'd like to offer, and so I'll recognize you now if you'd like to come to the witness table. You can take all that. You can take these. I think as you've heard me say here today, or maybe Mr. Griffiths say, "Well, in my absence, your written testimony will be made a part of the record, and I'll recognize you now for 5 minutes."
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And I'm proud today to offer my amendment to H.R. 1949, which would expand upon the bill's original goal of promoting Americans' LNG infrastructure. Since the bill transfers application authority to the Federal Emergency Regulatory Commission for natural gas export or import facilities, my amendment will further prioritize facilities that directly support our national security. By ensuring that the Commission prioritizes LNG infrastructure that supports U.S. military installations, our national emergency defense will improve dramatically. My amendment requires the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to work directly with the Secretary of Defense in identifying civilian LNG facilities that are vital to military readiness and to treat these as priority applications. Additionally, my amendment directs the Commission, again in consultation with the Defense Department, to recommend locations for additional federal support where military supporting infrastructure lacks reliable access to LNG. In Guam, the new Ukadu power plant both supplies Guam's many military installations and has the capacity to use LNG. Yet, because of the great distance and the current U.S. maritime deficiencies, LNG shipments to Guam seem impossible. With this amendment, I seek to change that shortcoming for my district and other districts that face this problem. Together, these steps ensure that our armed forces have the secure and dependable energy resources they need to operate effectively while promoting civilian infrastructure and industry. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moylan. Mr. Norman, do you have any questions? Ms. Scanlon, do you have any questions? I don't have any questions. I think you've done a great job of presenting your amendment. So thank you for coming and for your patience. Thank you. Anyone else seeking to testify on H.R. 1949, H.R. 3109, H.R. 5107, H.R. 5214, H.J. Res 131, S.J. Res 80, or H.Con Res 58. Seeing none, this closes the hearing portion of our meeting. Without objection, the committee stands in recess until 6:15 p.m. We will reconvene. The chair will be in receipt of a motion from the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith.
Madam Chair, I move the committee grant closed rules for SJ Res 80, providing for congressional disapproval under Chapter 8 of Title 5 United States Code of the rules submitted by the Bureau of Land Management relating to National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska Integrated Activity Plan Record of Decision. HJ Res 130, providing for congressional disapproval under Chapter 8 of Title 5 United States Code of the rules submitted by the Bureau of Land Management relating to Buffalo Field Office Record of Decision and approved Resource Management Plan Amendment, and HJ Res 131, providing for congressional disapproval under Chapter 8 of Title 5 United States Code of the rules submitted by the Bureau of Land Management relating to Coastal Plain Oil and Gas Leasing Program Record of Decision. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of each such joint resolution. The rule provides that each such joint resolution be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in each such joint resolution. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate on each such joint resolution, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Natural Resources or their respective designees. The rule provides each such joint resolution 1 motion to recommit or commit as the case may be. The rule further provides for consideration of H-Con Res 58, denouncing the horrors of socialism under a closed rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the concurrent resolution. The rule provides that the concurrent resolution shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the concurrent resolution. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Financial Services or their respective designees. The rule further provides for consideration of H.R. 1949, the Unlocking of Our Domestic LNG Potential Act of 2025 under a closed rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order. Bill, the rule provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce or their respective designees. The rule provides 1 motion to recommit. The rule further provides for consideration of H.R. 3109, the Refiner Act, under a closed rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce or their respective designees. The rule provides 1 motion to recommit. The rule further provides for consideration of H.R. 5107, the Common Sense Law Enforcement and Accountability Now in D.C. Act of 2025 under a closed rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, now printed in the bill, shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform or their respective designees. The rule provides 1 motion to recommit. The rule further provides for consideration of H.R. 5214, the District of Columbia Cash Bail Reform Act of 2025 under a closed rule. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, now printed in the bill, shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amended shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform or their respective designees. The rule provides 1 motion to recommit. Finally, the rule provides that upon transmission to the Senate of a message that the House has passed H.R. 4405, House Resolution 581 shall be laid on the table.
Thank you very much. You now heard the motion. Is there any discussion or amendment to the rule?
Yes, Madam Chair. Those were a lot of words to basically say there are 8 measures that will be considered under a completely closed rule. And I will remind my Republican friends that 87% of the legislation that you brought to the floor has been under a totally closed rule process. I mean, again, 8 in this bill alone. You're going to break your previous record of the most closed rules ever. And I just point that out because as we all talk about, you know, the importance of debate and discussion and having all ideas considered, that's not what this represents. I point that out. So we have a few amendments, and I would also say, you know, on the Epstein stuff, I'll get to that at the end. I mean, you guys are bending yourself into pretzels to try to get this to the floor, and I don't even understand what you're thinking, but we'll get to that at the end. So, Madam Chair, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make and order amendment number 5 to H. Con Res 58, offered by Representative Takano, which would clarify that programs including Medicare, Social Security, TRICARE, VA healthcare, and the VA home loan program, VA burial benefits, and VA homelessness programs are not included under the definition of socialism under this resolution. Earlier today, when I asked Chairman Hill, the top Republican on the Financial Services Committee, if he considered Medicare to be a socialist policy, he responded, and let me quote him verbatim, "I think it's on the side of state-controlled health care, so it could be considered socialist," end quote. When I asked him about the ACA credits, he said they are, quote, "on the side of socialism," end quote. So this resolution says that Congress, quote, "denounces socialism in all its forms and opposes the implementation of socialist policies in the United States," end quote. So therefore, this resolution condemns and denounces Medicare and the Affordable Care Act tax credits by the leading member of the Committee on Financial Services who came up and testified before us today. I think that is dangerous. I think it should be roundly rejected. I would urge a yes vote on my motion, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Does anybody wish to speak on the proposed amendment? Hearing none, the question is on the amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment's not agreed.
Madam Chair, because I think it's important to defend Medicare, I ask for a roll call vote.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mrs. Fishbach. Mrs. Fishbach, no. Mr. Norman. Mr. Norman, no. Mr. Roy. Mr. Roy, no. Mrs. Houchin. Mrs. Houchin, no. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy, no. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Griffith. Mr. Griffith, no. Mr. Jack.
No.
Mr. Jack, no. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Ms. Scanlon. Ms. Scanlon, aye. Mr. Neguse. Ms. Ledger Fernandez. Ms. Ledger Fernandez, aye. Madam Chair.
No.
Madam Chair, no.
The amendment.
3 yeas, 9 nays.
The amendment is not adopted.
I have another amendment to the rule, Madam Chair.
Mr. McGovern.